Videos you're about to see are a collection of videos that I've already done. Now, I've put these into categories. So in other words, out of the, at the moment, 900 odd videos I've done, I cover many different subjects from spirits, Bigfoots, aliens, ancient aliens, etc. So the video you're about to watch is a collection of just one subject. In other words, Anunnaki, pyramids, Egypt, whatever it is that you're just about to watch. Now, you can watch them all on YouTube free of charge, no problem at all. They're in sets of 5, as you see here, or they're actually in sets of 50, so you can actually watch them in one whole go, right from video number 1. But you can also go to my website and find the links and podcasts, etc. there. And the website address is ourtruehistory.co.uk, and you can again find the videos straight through there. And there's some special ones there which are also on YouTube. But if you're after something that's not on YouTube or on my website, I do have a Patreon page called Our True History, and it's at the moment it's got 76 other videos. Now, some of these are actually proper documentaries that I make. So there's a documentary called Everything You Need to Know About Spirits. There's a documentary called Everything You Need to Know About Mermaids. The spirit one is 3 hours long, fully edited properly, etc. So if you are interested in more of my kind of projects or what do I call them, videos, feel free to go to my Patreon page. And also ones that are not categorized on YouTube, even though they're free on YouTube, but the ones that are not categorized, if you click here, you'll see category videos on my Patreon page, and it's got other ones, so it just calls part videos. So basically it's the same as what you're watching now, but may not be on YouTube. I've put the category ones on Patreon, but again, you can watch them all in order on YouTube or my website free of charge. But Patreon, unfortunately, you have to pay. But that's why I sit and make very long documentaries about everything you need to know, etc. So hopefully I'll see you there. Anyway, enough of me waffling. Enjoy this whatever it is you're watching, because I'm using the same intro for all the videos. Thank you. So following on from the Book of Enoch, which talks about the Nibiru planet, which has a 3,600 year elliptical orbit. That means the Anunnaki who live on it, for one of our years, is 3,600 there. So they could sleep here on Earth for 100 years, and to us it would, or to them it would be one night, but to us obviously it's 100 years. So they came here, and when they landed, the first thing they did on the first day was catalogue stuff. So the first thing they done was catalogue water, and the second day they catalogued plants, the third day insects, the fourth day, and so on. And on the 7th day, guess what they did? They rested. Yeah, funny that's now totally changed in the other Bibles, but the original Bible, which was the Book of Enoch, explains it clearly. And they came to mine gold to help their atmosphere. Yes, we think gold is valuable, but we learned it from these guys, and I'll explain how these guys are connected to us in the next video. 2 of the Anunnaki that came down 450,000 years ago was Enki and Enlil. Now their stone carvings are everywhere, and ancient Sumerian, it talks about them, and these were sons of the king of Nibiru, which was Anu, and these princes are talked about, as well as everything else to do with the Anunnakis everywhere. But what they don't actually say is what race they're called. We call them Anunnaki, which means those who heaven from earth came, or other people call them princely seeds, princely sons, various descriptions, but it doesn't actually give a name for what the actual race was called. And it's not called Anunnaki. It's actually called Elohim, believe it or not. Now, we think Elohim is God, but what we're really doing is, if we went to another planet ourselves and we said we're humans, they would worship humans. They would think humans is the name for God. I get asked whether I've got any knowledge of the subjects I'm talking about. I've been on radio stations, American ones, and talk for an hour. I've had 30 years of research. So basically, going back to the Anunnaki creating the humans, they did it using their own DNA and the indigenous life that was here at the time. So to do that, they had to fuse our chromosomes. So we have 23, every other hominid had 24, which leads us then to the bloodlines So Adam and Eve's bloodline. So Noah, if you remember, was 950 years when he died. And that's because obviously we or them had part of the Anunnaki DNA who lived a lot longer than us because of their elliptical orbit. They lived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So 950 years for Noah is actually only about 10 days for the Anunnaki. So the long lifespan makes sense when you add that. So the Anunnaki were here 450,000 years ago. They used the humans that they created to help them mine in these ancient mine shafts. Now they didn't just stick to one place, which was Sumeria, which was the original place. They travelled all over the world looking for the gold and digging for the gold. And because of their long time spans, their names in different places, because if you just remember that if one of them slept for one night of their night, it's 100 years of our years. So to us, we would think they're immortal. And just over a couple of thousand years, a whole civilization can come and go. Rome's and Egypt and so on. Not saying they came and went, but I'm just saying that's the point, what I'm trying to say. So if you look down this side here, you'll see the names of the Anunnaki as written in various texts, and then you can actually see who they represent in different locations at different times. Forgive me for rushing through this. I only have a minute, so I can name some great books that could really go into some great detail. So we're up to the Anunnakis created the Homo sapiens sapiens to do their work for them, and the first written language is the ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets, which is obviously their own language, and that was created and found in Sumeria, which is where the first buildings were ever built, and they built these pyramids. They're called step pyramids or ziggurats, so forgive me for spelling it. So that makes sense, and that's where the oldest civilization's been found, Sumeria. So everything makes sense that they landed there, and that's where they first set up bases. But they did travel, and they travelled to Africa to look for gold, and they found gold, and there's a lot of mine shafts, ancient mine shafts. So while they were there, that's where they created the first Adam, or first Homo sapiens sapien, which matches our doctors. What we say now is where the first human come from. So now we know what the stone structures around the world are for. How did they actually build the stone structures? So it all's to do with the Anunnaki holding this little device in his hand, if you can see there. I'll try and show you a clearer picture here. This is a carving. Yes, they did put heads on. I'll explain that in another video. So it's got tiny little ridges on it. Michael Tellinger will explain how the sound resonance actually works with these. He's done a fantastic job. But basically, it's to do with anti-gravity, and they all worship the scarab beetle, and that's because the scarab beetle actually had its wings were anti-gravity. So have a watch of this. Look at that, and that's genuine. That was a guy doing tests. So it's all to do with the sound levitation frequencies. Just carrying on with the skeletons or the Nephilim. So some of these children of the Homo sapiens sapiens, but also children of the fallen angels, which is the Anunnaki. And bearing in mind the Anunnaki were about 10 to 12 feet themselves. But some of these skeletons that were found, a humongous size, as you can probably see here. So the Smithsonian actually had a court case in the early 1900s, and the court ordered the Smithsonian to tell them why there's no giant skeletons, even though people were giving them over to the Smithsonian Institute Museum. And they turned around and said that they don't want the narrative to be changed from what it is. In other words, what the Bible, the Bible, not the true Bible, which was the Book of Enoch, but the Bible that's been changed by people like the Smithsonian, who forced their narrative on us. You may have heard of David and Goliath. Well, Goliath was a Nephilim, a giant, and they were cannibalistic, ultra-violent. Now, these giants carried on living even after the Great Flood, and the Great Flood was done deliberately because the king of Nibiru, Anu, didn't like the fact that the bloodline, their bloodline, the true Anunnaki's bloodline, was mixed in with the Homo sapiens sapiens. So the idea was to wipe out everything on this planet. However, some of the Anunnaki didn't like the idea that their creations, which is the Homo sapiens sapiens, the hybrids, were actually going to perish. So Noah, by the time the flood version came along, Noah was around and he was warned. Now, there is some speculations that the giants are still around to this day. In fact, army whistleblowers have said that they've actually killed a giant in one of the Afghanistan caves, not where normal people hide, but where giants hide. So as time moved on, and after the flood, the Anunnaki, some of them allowed the humans to carry on. And in fact, they actually taught them things. And the first place to be taught laws and maths and everything else is, wait for it, the same place that they landed, which is Sumeria, or Mesopotamia as it's called, as the larger region. So the larger region is Mesopotamia, which is right next door to Egypt, which I will cover in another video. So the Anunnaki started to teach all of our laws, and that's where we understood what a king is, what a queen is, what the laws are, which leads on to the Ten Commandments, which was given by the Anunnaki to Moses as a way of helping humans, or Homo sapiens sapiens, understand what's right and wrong. So the Anunnaki tried to wipe out the Nephilim and humans at the same time with the flood. Didn't quite work, and then the Anunnaki agreed that they will let the humans live, and in fact they even started to teach us agriculture, etc. Now, the buildings that the Anunnaki built, a lot of them were on ley lines, and a ley line is a power grid of Earth. So, for example, the Great Pyramid is smack bang on a ley line, right in the middle of one. And you've got other structures such as Stonehenge, you've got, which goes on a ley line, you've got, so many people were talking about it, but also where it doesn't, where it's not on land and the ley line crosses, there are monuments, so still these structures. So for example, Bermuda Triangle has a pyramid apparently at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, so ISIS apparently decided to take pictures of themselves destroying Sumerian artifacts, Sumerian being Anunnakis. Now, that's really weird because obviously it's something that they really wanted us to see, but I can't see why that would have affected them, whether or not Anunnakis were here or not. But eyewitnesses have said that these ISIS people had headphones on, headsets on, and people were saying that it was actually the Black Ops doing it, secret Black Ops, to destroy evidence of the Anunnaki. Now, even the people that worked in the museum said that when the ISIS came in, they actually only stole real artifacts from Sumeria, not the fake ones that look real in the museum. So why would ISIS do all that? They probably didn't. It probably was the Black Ops destroying evidence. Okay, this one's going to blow your mind because we're supposedly descendants of monkeys, which is kind of weird because monkeys should have evolved into us, in which case why they're still monkeys, but that's another subject for another time. So monkeys apparently have 96% DNA of humans, so therefore, hey, that's it, that we are from them. But however, a banana has 60% of our same DNA, so you see where we're going with this. So some religions say don't eat pigs, and the reason why they say don't eat pigs is because about 10,000 years ago the Anunnaki was running out of food. So what they done was they genetically modified human and wild boar to create the domestic pig, and that actually matches up with the time frame that our scientists say now. And the amount of things that the pigs have that we have, compared to what monkeys have, they have virtually nothing of ours. Pigs have so many things: teeth, skin, liver, blah blah blah. Now, I've touched on the Anunnaki's elongated skull. Now, these pictures here are from head binding. Now, the children or babies that were born around the time of the Anunnaki being here, and in the same place, believe it or not. Yes, Sumeria was the first place to have head binding. Now, they was recreating what they could see, which was the Anunnaki with their elongated skulls. Now, the Anunnaki loved to be worshipped, as you can see by the many of these type of carvings. But the Anunnaki actually fought amongst themselves, partly to do with us humans, or Homo sapiens sapiens, and partly to do with greed. Yes, they were greedy. Now, they had so many wars in between that time period from them arriving here to about just 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. One such war was a nuclear blast. Yes, and I will explain that in the next video. So we're looking at Noah's Ark here, which we believe is what it looked like. However, recent translations of Dead Sea Scrolls and other texts suggest that it was a pyramid shape. The problem with a pyramid shape is it's really bad to float on water. Now, there are UFOs, modern UFOs, that are shaped as pyramids. There's videos of them online. However, I do not personally believe the Anunnaki used pyramid-shaped UFOs at that period. So Noah lived for 900 and something odd years, and that's possibly because he was a descendant of Adam and Eve, which was a hybrid of the Anunnaki. However, recent readings and translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls have suggested that he was actually inserted into his mother as a fetus, and then when he was born, he came out with this glowing skin. So therefore, he's a different type of being compared to the others. Now, Jesus also had a glowing skin. So if everything's making sense so far, and it seems logical that the Anunnaki were experimenting with DNA. Don't forget, we do it now. We've learned to splice DNA. So it's not impossible for us to now imagine that the myths that we all told were myths are actually real creatures that the Anunnaki were trying to combine. So you've got, for example, the Minotaur, the Centaur, the Harpy. Now, that's not too hard to imagine if they were here for that long period of time. And it was only up until about 3,000 years ago that they kind of stopped creating these weird monstrosities. So what I'm trying to show is the logic between what I'm saying compared to, you know, us just having myths and people creating these statues, you know, taking weeks probably to create a statue of something they've never seen and they've just made up. Or did the Anunnaki deliberately create these hybrids? Okay, this might get a few people upset. Please, nothing to do with me hating any religion whatsoever. This is just where I've been led down this path of research. Obviously, if you don't like what I'm saying, just walk away, please. But what I believes happened is Abraham, who was Homo sapiens sapien, who wasn't an Anunnaki, he could see what the Anunnaki were doing and how they manipulated people and how people worshipped them and did pretty much whatever they wanted, and revered them as gods. Now, I believe that Abraham saw this and decided to create Judaism, which was the first one, or possibly the first religious sect out there. So he did that in, wait for it, Mesopotamia. Oh, yes, funny. That's where if you've watched all the other videos, you know why Mesopotamia is so important. So then other people started to follow suit and started creating their own religions to get the same power that he had and that the Anunnaki had. So we're just sort of summing up that the Anunnaki arrived at Mesopotamia, which is sort of Middle East now. They did travel to Africa to create mines, and they also created Adam and Eve there. But they also travelled a lot further adrift. But Mesopotamia is the main area where they had actually fights over different territories. The Anunnaki did, and one such fight resulted in a nuclear explosion, where you ended up with green glass, which is only achieved when you have some sort of nuclear explosion. Now, in the Bible, it talks about what happened to people when this happened. So obviously we now know it's a nuclear explosion, but they said things like, you know, the skin was falling off and the flesh would rot from their eyes. So if you look at what actually does happen, you know, to a person with a nuclear explosion, the same sort of effects happen with radiation, skin burns. So, dinosaurs and man, did they actually coexist? Well, actually they did. There's so many footprints of both dinosaurs and humans walking alongside each other. Now, the Anunnaki were around at this time, and they did eat the dinosaurs, and I'll show you that in the next video as to why the Anunnaki definitely were around. But also the Bible, which was only 2,000 years old, as you know, mentions a behemoth, which is a dinosaur. So what we've got here is proof that dinosaurs didn't die out 65 million years ago. In fact, they continued right up until basically humans wiped them out with the Anunnaki's help. Obviously, there was more humans at this point than there were Anunnakis. And of course, the Anunnakis eventually left Earth, so we destroyed the remaining dinosaurs, and I'll explain more in the next video. This guy here is really important, Zecharia Sitchin. Fortunately, he's passed now, but he translated a lot of the text, Book of Enoch, etc. He's a great linguistic. Now, a lot of debunkers say he was working as a Freemason and he was deliberately putting out misinformation. Unfortunately, those people that debunk him don't use logic, because anyone else can translate those texts as well. You see, that's where their idea falls down. And they did. Other people have translated those texts, and they pretty much agree with Zecharia Sitchin. So he might have been allowed to do this by the Freemasons, or he was going against them. Either way, his information seems to be correct. Now, he's wrote a series of books which you might find interesting. Now, around some point while the Anunnaki were here, the grey aliens arrived, and there's various proof of that in carvings and things, and I'll talk more in the next episode. So the two princes, the two brothers of Nibiru, Enki and Enlil, in fact Enkai, Kai is the name for Earth, so it all makes sense now how we even got the planet Earth because of them. So everything that I'm sort of showing you now makes a lot more sense, I hope, than what you've read elsewhere. Now, they sometimes depicted themselves with wings, not all the time, but sometimes, and I think that's just basically a power trip, saying that, hey, we can fly and you guys can't. But sometimes there's these statues have been found which look reptilian. Now, a lot of people say, well, these are, the Anunnaki were reptilians because they found these kind of statues. I don't think so. Not when you look at the quality of these statues. Absolutely fantastic compared to this. So I think these are probably reptilians. Now, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. I'll get to another point. So you may remember I said that I think the Elohim were actually the name for the race. So we're humans. The instead of Anunnaki, that's what we call them. But the Elohim is what they, as a race, are called. And the reason why I believe that is because nowhere does it put down their race. And now they talk about everything else, but there's no mention of their race. So it makes sense that if the Elohim was the race, then it's written down everywhere. Zecharia Sitchin actually agrees with me on that.
Were the Elohim the sons of the sons of God, or were the Elohim
They were the Anunnaki, and it is their sons born on earth who married the daughters of...
So he's basically saying the same. So the race is called... now, please watch this guy. He's passed now. His name's Zecharia Sitchin. Before his videos get taken off, watch him on YouTube. There's many videos. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Jesus. So you know my thoughts on God, the white bearded person, e.g. Anunnaki. All makes sense so far if you've watched all the videos up to now, because they were white bearded people. And we called them the Elohim, which means God, or we call it God. So yeah, that kind of makes sense. So where does Jesus fit into it? Well, Jeffrey Doherty is a Christian, or was a Christian. I'm not quite sure how he sets himself up now, but he's redone a retranslation original from the actual original writings, as opposed to the Bibles. Now, we all know the Bibles have been changed. So he's gone back to the original text to see how it actually really translates. So let me read out some passages to you. So the English Standard Version of the Bible. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from Holy Spirit. There's another version that you may see in a different Bible. When as his mother Mary was exposed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. And then there's different, they're all different ones. But let's just go on to actually now what he translated that as. You will be taken hold of or seized in your womb. You shall be overtaken, and the and the power, might, and strength of the Lord will envelop you. Okay, so that is way different from what the Bible say. So let's just break this down for a second. You'll be taken hold of or ceased in your womb. Okay, that's definitely a forced issue there. So anyone that knows about alien abductions at the moment know that that's pretty similar. Now, bear in mind, Jesus supposedly had a glowing skin, same as Noah. And then it wrote, "You shall be overtaken." So, you know, anyone that knows about how the aliens beam up people, with the power and might and strength of the Lord will envelop you. So anyone that knows about how people get beamed up into an alien craft, that's exactly what happens. So they're enveloped in this light. He goes on and explains a lot more, but I'm just trying to prove a point that the actual proper translations are not really nothing really what we read in the Bible. So well worth looking him up and doing your own research. Fascinating. So from this point forward, I'm going to assume you've already watched all the other videos. So I'm just talking now about Anunnaki and dinosaurs. So we know the Anunnaki had a book written by a person called Enoch that they would tell him what to write in the book. Now, in the book of Enoch, it kind of talks as if there's dinosaurs, which would make sense because I believe dinosaurs lived right up until at least 2,000 years ago. And it's talking about the giants turned against them. And I'm not on about giants of giants as in human giants or giant men. I'm on about giants as in the dinosaurs that are giants. And then they're talking about the beasts, reptiles and fish devour one another, etc. So the Anunnaki, as described by the writings, say that they created man, or they came here 450,000 approximate years ago and created man in their image. Anunnaki arrived 450,000 years ago, spent over 100,000 years trying to mine for gold, realised they can't. They decided to create a species from the indigenous species that's already here to help them mine for the gold they needed, and they created Homo sapiens sapien around 315,000 years ago. But they didn't just stop there. They actually carried on. As we know, they tried to make all sorts of weird creatures, as you see there. But what's interesting is they also carried on, and so there's this discovery here that was found to be the age of 130,000 years ago. But this stone structure or skeleton structure came and went. So in other words, it was here in a blink of an eye and gone. How could that happen with evolution? No, it was the Anunnaki created it. Space, the final frontier. So we call ourselves the third rock from the sun because we're egotistical and we believe that the sun is everything. But the actual Anunnaki in their texts ride it from outwards to inwards, which is different from what we do. And the reason why they do that in their texts is because, let's be honest, they come from outside of our solar system. So to them, they're passing all these other planets to get to us, as opposed to coming from the center of the sun outwards, you see. So it makes more sense when you look at the texts. And they did, they actually did describe planets on their carvings. So it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to understand that back then there was no telescopes. So the only way anyone would have been able to do such a thing as this would be as if they travelled there. And that solidifies. In ancient texts, not just in Sumeria but also India, in fact, they called the flying spaceships that the gods travelled around in Vimanas, and they would produce fire and light, in other words fire as if it was a rocket ship, and inside this shaped craft was the gods. So as you see their description of the Vimana, where they're housing, obviously people didn't, the people that carved this didn't actually go inside and see what it looked like, but there's enough descriptions out there that people have actually tried to recreate the shape of and the description of what actually it would look like. Now in Baalbek, there's this massive structure. Now these stones were put on after, but apparently, according to researchers, this was a landing pad for the Vimana. So before this was put on, it was just a landing pad. Gold. Yeah, I've mentioned gold a lot about the Anunnaki, grinding it up or trying to find the powdered gold. Now, the best place they found gold was for mining was South Africa, I believe. I believe that's where the most mines were, which is where they also started to create Adam. Now, there's a picture here on Michael Tellinger's website, I believe. Look for michaeltellinger.com if you're interested in the mines of South Africa, the ancient mines, not the ones that they're doing now. Here's a picture of people that found an ancient mine and were exploring it. And this site here, ancientorigins.net, says that, again, proving that there was mines, that 5,300 years ago, the people that mined the mines were of high standing. In other words, they were people that was, or people that were regarded as high positions in the community. But let's be honest, 5,300 years ago, what benefit would they be mining for? Think, what would they need underground as a caveman? Yeah, there's not a lot they would do underground unless they were making a house. I can't grasp the concept other than the gold that the Anunnaki needed, and it wasn't 5,300 years ago. It would have been well older than that. But obviously, mainstream's gone with the narrative that, you know, humans around 5,000 years ago were at, you know, just started to have a brain and started to do stuff themselves. But we all know different. So, yeah, so the gold mines are real. South Africa, look for Michael Tellinger. I actually get people saying to me there's no such things as these mythological creatures such as the centaurs because we've never found them. Now, all it takes is for one of them to have been created by the Anunnaki, just one. And then the statues and carvings came after. Now, you try and find one skeleton, ancient skeleton, from this, it's really difficult to find. It's like looking at a needle in a haystack over the whole planet trying to find where that one was. There could have been more, but I'm just using one as an example. And to prove how little the people that say to me there's no such thing as these is, I will just point out there's this skeleton that's recently been found in Indonesia. And it belongs to a group of humans that have never been found before anywhere else. So they've only just found this in a cave, in fact. So my point is, what is? So I've mentioned giants before, and I've sort of said some of them can be really tall. Now, Michael Tellinger, go to his site, michaeltellinger.com. He's got this bone. It's a petrified bone, well, finger bone, of a giant. And I mean a giant. So I don't know if you can see the fingernail just there and the size of some money next to it. This giant with this finger would have been 70 meters tall apparently, which is absolutely huge. So I suggest you all strongly go visit his site, sign up, register, and he'll keep sending you these fantastic bits of information. And that's the location there, I won't even try and pronounce it, where this finger bone near some stone circles was found. So he tries to let us know. Go visit his site, michaeltellinger.com. I have been asked enough times to do serious work on the Book of Enoch and the Anunnaki, because the Book of Enoch is where we get a lot of our information for the Anunnaki. So I am now, you'll be pleased to know, I'm now going to be doing these 3-minute deep going into deep detail on the Book of Enoch and the Anunnaki. So let's start. Now, I'm using Wikipedia. Don't hate me, I do know stuff without going into Wikipedia, but I'm just using it because it's got everything at a glance that you may need to go through. So the Book of Enoch, I'm just, as I say, I'm using this as reference to help you guys. So Enoch was the great grandfather of Noah. So I've already sort of slightly covered that before, but I'll cover it again later. Now, Enoch was asked by one of the gods, probably Enki or Enlil, when I say gods, aliens, to transcribe what went on. And now it wasn't just what went on Earth, it was what went on prior to even them coming to Earth. So their whole backstory. Now, the book of Enoch contains basically different versions of texts. So you've actually got different, like this version here from the Dead Sea Scrolls is the Aramaic. Whereas you've also got cuneiform, Sumerian cuneiform, and some other different writings in there. So as you see there, Greek and Latin fragments. So it all basically makes up the Book of Enoch. So the Book of Enoch, there's only 200 people worldwide, doesn't say it here, but I know this, that can actually read and interpret the Book of Enoch. Zachariah Sitchin was one of the most famous ones. Unfortunately, he's passed now. So if you are interested in this, you'll have to find one of the 400 people that have transcribed this. Now, they all come along and say very similar things from their own Now, according to Zachariah Sitchin, each person, and this is how the Bible works, each person that's transcribed the Book of Enoch uses their own background of what they've learned in life. So where I might say green grass, they may say grass green, or some other type of description for it. So as I go on about the Book of Enoch, you got to remember that each person, just like the Bible, have transcribed it. They've put their own stamp on what they think it actually represents, because there's no hard and fast rule of what a word says in English, for example. Please, no rude comments. Yeah, you get what I'm saying. So I know I said I'd do 3-minute videos. In the last video I said that, but really they're not getting hits. The 3-minute ones are literally 100 people if I'm lucky, whereas a minute ones, a couple of thousand. Now, back in the day when I first started doing these, I was getting tens of thousands. But what's also happening apparently is people was telling me that they can't actually find my videos anymore. Even though they're following me and they should show up as they scroll on all the videos, different people's videos, mine's not showing up, which means I'm probably hitting the mark with some of my comments, and obviously the powers that be doesn't want people to know. So they're strangling me. So I probably will stick with the 1-minute videos just to get more views out there. I'm sorry. I know I wanted to do the 3-minute videos. Okay, so let's go back to the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki, as you know, live on the planet Nibiru, and their orbit was the elliptical orbit that goes around our sun every 3,600 years approximately. And there's a website here. It's a good little website. I'll just give you the link to it. You can pause it. www. If you want to go onto that website, you can. Okay, so what you do is you put your birthday in, and it will tell you how old you will be on your next birthday, and how old you are on whatever planet that's here. Obviously, they don't have Nibiru planet on here. But so I'm just, before I carry on with the Anunnaki, I just want to make it clear that although on Earth we live approximately 80 years, let's just say. So if you went from Earth and stayed on their planet, the Nibiru's planet, that has 3,600 year orbit, you'd still only die when you're 80. So their planet wouldn't go around our sun once. You'd be dead in their terms. You'd be dead in probably almost like a day or two or week or whatever it would be. So, but that's because we've evolved to live 80 years. Some argue that we was genetically changed to actually live only 80 years, because prior to the flood we was living 300, 400, 500 years. But so if you was living on Nibiru and evolved on Nibiru, then to you on Nibiru you probably would live 80 years, maybe longer. But 80 years going around our sun at 3,600 years every one of our years would make you live longer. So just trying to reiterate that point, that although we would die in a week on their planet, if they came here, they would live a lot longer and seem immortal. the Anunnaki, come on down. And they did actually come on down, and what they actually found, and they wrote about this a lot, is that the ground that they walked on was hot. They didn't like our sun, and that's because our sun is quite close to us compared to where they live on their planet. Now, occasionally when their planet finally gets round on their elliptical orbit, yes, it gets hot, but they couldn't stand our heat, and they wrote about burning their feet and all sorts of stuff. So the Anunnaki wore clothes, yes. Guess where humans learnt to make clothes? I'll give you one guess. I know we all think we're clever and we done it, but guess where we learned it from? So they wore clothes, and in fact the women actually would have hairdos. Now I know this looks like a lizard creature, but apparently according to stitching, this was an Anunnaki woman all dressed up to the nines I'm guessing on a day out. So women had power. The Anunnaki women, although it was still a male-dominated society for the Anunnaki, the women actually did have power, which is quite interesting. Not power as in superpowers, but it's interesting because when you think Sumeria, which is the sort of, shall we say, the birthplace of where they arrived and first colonized, is now Iraq, and as we know, this sort of area here in the Middle East, women's rights are not adhered to as they are, for example, here in the UK. So I would have thought that, you know, these guys learned how to treat women from the Anunnaki, but no, I think they just decided how to treat women for their own power reasons. Now, if you look here, this is the Anunnaki tree. So this is Anu. So he at the time of when they came down, he was the king of Nibiru, and he had. The Anunnaki did sort of inbreed at points, but the King Anu, so I'm not going to go any further back at the moment, but the King Anu had a daughter as well as Enlil and Enki, but the daughter was a goddess here on Earth. We actually worshipped her as a goddess, and that would make sense seeing as Enki and Enlil were also classed as gods, so these were the princely brothers. Now, her job here on Earth, as you see, wasn't just to look pretty. And look at the size of this. I know this is obviously a modern rendering, but look at the size of the lion there. Now remember, these characters from Nibiru were 8 to 10 foot, sometimes 12 foot tall. So just imagine standing up right now and looking down at your feet. That's how small someone would be. That would be their head at your feet. So this is why the carvings and everything show these giants compared to us little. Okay, so before I carry on with the in-depth Anunnaki, I have to address the debunkers. Now, this person here is an archaeologist called Sarah Kroenig, and just listen to what she says, and I'm going to go through where she's wrong. And I'm sorry, I have a little saying that I hate thick people, and thick people are the people that's not prepared to open their eyes. Now, she's totally blinked because the actual title of this video is Aliens Built the Pyramids and Other Absurdities. Okay, so let's go through this and make her look absurd.
That aliens from the planet Nibiru had come to Earth and established the ancient Sumerian culture in Mesopotamia. I have these conversations.
So someone had mentioned that to her, and
a lot. On planes, in bookstores, and in bars, people want to talk with me about pseudo-archaeology.
Yeah, not really pseudo, it's actually real archaeology, but you're not prepared to open your eyes.
Something that seems like archaeology, but isn't.
Or you're paid.
It involves making wild and unproven
or you're paid to debunk this kind of stuff.
Claims about the human past. Things like aliens built the pyramids.
Okay, so she's gone for the picture there of the Greys, which we know the Anunnaki are not like the Greys. The Anunnaki are actually, well, just like us really, or we're like them. So there's a first mistake there. Clearly she doesn't know much about Sumeria. And, you know, these tablets are in Sumeria, you know, which is Mesopotamia. So, wrong on that account, love.
Or survivors from the lost continent of Atlantis invented hieroglyphic writing. Now, most of us know that claims like these are unfounded.
Well, they're not unfounded, actually, because you've got the Dead Sea Scrolls that actually talk about where they landed, who they were, and actually covers it. So, and that's the Book of Enoch, which is made up of all these different things. So, yeah, the proof's there, to be honest with you. So they're not unfounded. Otherwise, if you're disregarding the Dead Sea Scrolls, then you have to disregard the Bible.
And frankly, absurd. Yet they're everywhere.
Yes, they're everywhere because it's freaking fact, you numpty.
They're on TV shows, in movies, and in books. Think of the History Channel series Ancient Aliens.
So where she was just talking about the planet Nibiru, look, this is from NASA's own website here. Caltech researchers have found mathematical evidence suggesting that there may be a Planet X. Now, if you remember my very first video, I mentioned Planet X is the name. So the last video I was just talking about this woman here. So it's not worth carrying on whatever she says, because obviously if she's disregarded the facts, then whatever else she carries on and tries to lie about is just nonsense and lies. So let's go to another one here. So this video here, colossal cranium. So let's have a listen to what he says.
The ancient alien theories have been widely criticized and rejected. Why? Because their methods are completely backwards from how scientific facts are found.
Okay, so going widely rejected. Now, actually, it's widely rejected by people that don't want it. So in other words, the Smithsonian, the Rockefellers, any institute that's funded by them. You see where I'm going with that. And now, as for the proof, we've got here these skulls, and as we know, these skulls are not boarded, head boarded or head bound. These actually have different features to a human skull. So there's a bit of a proof there.
Instead of looking at all the data and evidence and providing proof.
Okay, let's look at the data and evidence of... Now, look, this is the evidence that they give us. The pyramids of Giza, like Egyptian pyramids, came blah, blah, blah before them. They were royal tombs, a final resting place. Okay, no bodies were found in any pyramids across the world, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pyramids across the world, believe it or not. Not one body. However, the tombs that look like tombs, the sort of place that you find Tutankhamun, were tombs. So when they try and debunk it, they use this kind of crap here that basically says it was tombs. So straight away, they're wrong. So they're following the wrong information in the first place, this video here. And if you're just talking about the pyramids alone, look at this. Even Sky News finally admits that the Great Pyramid of Giza can collect and concentrate electromagnetic energy. Now, we've probably mentioned this before on my videos anyway, where the power, there's significant power that comes from actually the top of the pyramid. And some of these still have it. The Bosnian pyramid does, where it's obviously a power source. So if Sky News is talking about that, I know Sky, we can't trust Sky, but the fact that they've actually even allowed that sort of information out there, then you've got these characters here that just follow the narrative. I know I'm going on about debunking, but
ancient alien enthusiasts piece together stories, often from very old and very unreliable sources.
Well, no, actually, the old information is actually from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Enoch. The firmament, basically, from what I understand, they say, people that say the flat earth says that this firmament is a solid object, impenetrable. NASA's been lying to us for since they sent rockets up. They've made fake claims that, which now turn out to be possibly true, that there's nothing outside of this dome, and up here, well, outside of the dome, they say there's nothing, but of course nothing is something, and therefore it's space. So when they send a rocket up and they drop a pencil and it floats, that was just all made up by NASA way back, and they have to carry on making that lie now. But we know with our own vacuum chambers, etc., that there is such a thing as anti-gravity, and it would float. So it's a lot of aggro for NASA to have gone through to continuously lie right back then, and not just NASA but other countries, to lie and say that there's I don't know, I'm just struggling to comprehend their thoughts on this. To lie and say all this time, I would have, if I was lying to the people, I wouldn't have said, oh, you know, you drop a pencil and it's going to float. That's a lot of aggro to go through, to lie. But also, like, for example, I've been told that the flat earthers believe with the dome that our GPS satellite signals that we get are actually on helium balloons. So instead of sitting up there in orbit, they're actually inside this dome on helium balloons, which we know there's wind that blows around and GPS needs to be accurate, and I don't know, just so anyway, so let's have a look what the information where these flat earthers get this from. So let's be honest, it goes all the way back to the Book of Enoch, because the Book of Enoch predates the Bible. So let's have a quick look now. So this is chapters from the Book of Enoch. I'll just read out a couple of bits. Now, if you, as I've said before, if you replace the word heaven with space, in other words, the space where Star Trek happens up there in space, the Bible and everything else makes so much more sense. So it says, I saw the four winds which bear the earth and the firmament of the space, which is space above. I'll just go back to this bit down here, because I saw the winds on the earth carrying the clouds. I saw the paths of the angels. Now we know angels is messengers, which is Anunnaki. So I saw the path of the Anunnaki, in other words, the route that they're taking. I saw that at the end of the firmament of the space above. I saw the end of the firmament of the space above. Now all that is, really, let's be honest, is it's our ozone layer, and they came in rockets. They didn't come in anti-gravity machines, so they would have struggled to get through this, our ozone layer. And I actually need your help on this one. So I've got a theory that no one else has ever mentioned, and you lovely smart people will let me know whether you think this idea is actually correct or not. So we're going back to the firmament. Now I think the firmament is just basically our atmosphere. So the Anunnaki came in their ships, and we know they're rocket ships because it says it in the Bible, basically, with the loud thunder and the fire behind, as opposed to anti-gravity. So when they hit our atmosphere, they started to burn up, obviously, because it's well, unless it's anti-gravity, you'll end up doing this kind of thing. Now their own planet obviously had dwindled in atmosphere, and we know that because they came here to mine for gold to spread in their atmosphere to help protect it. So they could quite easily leave their planet without having this atmosphere issue. But when they hit Earth, they wrote about how hard it was to try and get through. And of course, we've equated that now as an invisible dome over Earth, and then we've got people talking about hollow Earth, flat Earth. So Halley's Comet has a orbit of 75 to 76,000 years. However, we only see it in the night sky for a couple of days, I think it is. Now, I asked someone, a flat earther, I said, well, where does Halley's Comet go? And they said, yeah, they don't really know. Because obviously, if it takes 75,000 years and we only see it for 2 or 3 days, technically it should only be a week before we see it again. So it goes off somewhere and it goes out further. So obviously if there's a dome, it goes outside the dome. And if there's, because the flat earthers say there's no space outside, so that kind of poo-poos that idea, I think. And also when people watch rockets go up, like Elon Musk's, what do? Just watch it go up, hit the firmament and come back down? No, they watch it go up. You don't see it come back down, which means it's getting outside of our atmosphere, getting out into space. But my point here is Samaria had landing ports, spaceports, according to Zecharia Sitchin. Now, imagine, so this is where the spaceport was, according to Sitchin, and this is where the Great Pyramid is. Imagine if the pyramid was also designed to put power, some sort of energy, because we know that actually produces energy. Imagine that energy going up into the ozone or up into our atmosphere and actually creating a hole which would allow the Anunnaki rockets to go through it a lot easier than burning up as they do now. So it's not too far from there, and we know the rocket ships had wings because of the Vimanas, the images. Okay, so the Book of Enoch, let's cut straight to the chase. They were totally aware, so Enoch was a scribe, they were totally aware of spirits. So look, chapter here, though ye were holy, spiritual, living the eternal life. So they was aware of eternal life for the spirits, not just their own longevity of life. Now we know they lived a long time, but eternal is something that we attribute to spirits, and there's the word there. So I want to try and show you the difference between spirits and angels, because in the Book of Enoch there is a difference. Obviously everyone's mixed it all up and said the spirits are angels and they come down, but I'm trying to show you that they know the difference between a spirit and an angel. So if you just bear with me over the next couple of videos. Okay, so here, then I wrote out their petition and the prayer in regard to their spirits and their deeds individually, and in regard to their... This is absolutely following on from the last video, so please watch the last one first. So we was going back to where we was talking about spirits and the Anunnaki knowing the difference between spirits and angels. So I just read another paragraph there, but let's have a look at this paragraph here. And he took up his parable and said, Enoch the righteous man, whose eyes were opened by God, in other words, Enoch was been shown stuff, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens. Now the Holy One could have been Anu, the king of Nibiru, and heavens is obviously space, as we all know, because you can't take someone physically up to heaven while they're still alive. So you have to read it properly and put space there. Which the angels showed me. Now angels are messengers, and they are Anunnaki. This is the third part of this particular thing that I'm talking about, so please watch the other two first. Okay, so we're talking here that the Anunnaki knew the difference between spirits and angels. Angels were, to Enoch, angels were just Anunnaki, same as if I called a cab driver a cab driver. I don't call him human, I call him a cab driver. And that's what an angel is. It's a messenger. It's one of the Anunnaki coming down. And there's higher up Anunnakis that are called holy angels, but really they're just sort of like supervisors. And so here's a paragraph here. I saw the paths of the Anunnaki, and I saw the end of the earth, the firmament of the heaven above. In other words, space. We changed that to space, and we changed firmament to atmosphere. So the next video you have to watch as well. Okay, to finish off proving that the Anunnaki knew the difference between an angel, which is just a name for, as you watch the other videos now hopefully, just a name for an Anunnaki or a job, and spirits. So here we go. In one of the chapters here, then said Uriel, one of the holy angels. Now, as I mentioned before, holy angels means the higher up jobs, you know, like a supervisor or a manager, that kind of thing. One of the holy angels who was with me. So they're physical beings, not angelic and spiritual. Now, if you look here, so chapter 22, I saw, in brackets, the spirit of a dead man. Do you see that? Spirit, dead. So they know the difference between an angel and a spirit, and they've said it many a times, as you see here. We've all heard of witchcraft and curses and voodoo dolls, but where did that come from? What's the earliest record of it? Well, actually, it's the Book of Enoch, which we all know predates the Bible. So let's have a look at what the Book of Enoch talks about curses. So here's a paragraph. And for you, the goddess, there shall be a curse. Now, they do talk about the curse a lot, and it's actually not like a curse as in a swear word. It's actually a curse as in they're going to curse you. And this is just a handful of descriptions here, but they do it a lot. They do talk about cursing people. So we don't know whether or not the curse is some sort of magic, or whether they've put a curse on someone and then sort of the jinn comes to attack them, which is possible. But they certainly believed in a curse of some sort. The moment you've all been waiting for, a real Anunnaki. There he is. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now look at this watch. So, okay, they're way different watches, as you can see, but here's the footage that was shot in a tomb in Iran. Yes, Iran, which is the same place, wait for it, that the Sumeria was. So that makes sense that a tomb would have the Anunnaki in it. So this is a sarcophagus, and it's apparently 12,000 years old, which, as we know, the people that's smart, we know the pyramids were built about 12,000 years. Obviously, mainstream say, no, we weren't that smart back then. Now, if this is a genuine Anunnaki in a stasis chamber, now apparently there was a couple of others that woke up and were relocated by the government. If this is a fake one, a fake video, I saw this about 10, 15 years ago, so it's older than mobile phones, and it is shot with a camcorder. There's a hell of a lot of detail. Obviously, my footage here showing you is really poor, but if you actually watch the video, you'll see there's a hell of a lot of detail gone into this. I mean, they could have just put a guy in a, if it's fake, they could have just put a guy in a bloody, you know, sarcophagus, or just, you know, some bricks around him, and we wouldn't have known any difference. But they, if this isn't, you know, if this is real, then it makes sense. If it's fake, they've done a hell of a lot. There's that watch thing again. It looks like a watch, but it's not. It's obviously some device that they use. So go and watch it. Now, the Anunnaki there, the guy, the king, we call him a king, but obviously they're Anunnakis, or a god, whatever you want to call him. So he is pale-skinned, which makes sense, because that's what the Book of Enoch and everything else talks about them being. I know some people say that they believe they're black, but there's nothing there to say that they're black. So have a look, tell me what you think. Just doing a follow-up because some people are saying that this character here, which is an Anunnaki, is black, or supposedly an Anunnaki is black. I can't actually see it myself. I can't see sort of anything that resembles someone black. Obviously the picture's not great, but the skin to me looks pale. Now, so the Book of Enoch, so this is my thoughts on it. Obviously, if you've got your own thoughts, I have asked for proof on the other video. Can you show me some sort of literature, not just a website, but you know, like where it's from, somewhere like the Book of Enoch or Dead Sea Scrolls or something. If someone send me that to say that the Anunnaki were black, I'll more than happy read it and change my views. But as it stands, my views are just based on what I've read from such things as the Book of Enoch, where they're pale-skinned. So the Anunnaki, in my opinion, obviously, if you differ from that, please do a video. I'd love to watch it. There's no hate here whatsoever. I'm just saying, just, you know, do your own video, let me see it, and if I'm wrong, I'm more than happy to admit I'm wrong. But the way I see it, so there was 4 black indigenous species here at the time: Homo florensis, erectus, possibly Neanderthal. I can't remember the 4 off the top of my head. Now, the story goes that the Anunnaki eventually gave up trying to mine for gold on their own and decided to create workers. So they genetically modified or artificially inseminated themselves, the women, depending which sort of version you read. Either way, they ended up creating Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve technically would have been olive-skinned, because obviously if you've got one white parent, which would be the Anunnaki, and one black parent, you might end up with something, you know, like an olive-skinned, which would make sense, seeing as the Anunnaki were in the Middle East, and that's where we get sort of Egypt and the sort of not black skin but sort of lighter skin. So that, to me, that all makes sense. So I just thought I did a follow-up on the last video. So obviously, if you've got your own thoughts, please, again, no hate, no just saying they're one particular colour or another. Just obviously give me some facts, as I'm trying to do here. You know, we'll get to the bottom of it together. Thanks. Here is another possibly Anunnaki that's found in Kurdistan. This is an old video again, the shot with a camcorder. Now this one I would call fake, because I think, just looking at it, I don't think that's real. I might be wrong, just the way everything's sort of waxy. shall we say. Certainly doesn't, the face doesn't give me the appearance. I mean, I might be wrong. The fact that the beard's sort of cut dead straight there. I don't know, I've worked with props actually in the past, in previous life, for movies. To me that looks like a wax head. Now when you compare that to the other one that I was already talking about, wow, see the difference? That one's got, you know, there's a real skin tone and everything. So I just thought I'd show that. What we're saying really is the Anunnaki came here about 450,000 years ago, but 300,000 years ago is when they created man. Now if you look here, this is from the Express, saying that archaeologists are blown away that the Neanderthals 50,000 years ago, bear in mind I just said 300,000 years ago, they're shocked at some of the tools that the Neanderthals, which we know probably wasn't Neanderthals, it was probably the Anunnaki's tools, or the tools that they allowed humans that they created to produce these tools. So where the archaeologists are shocked that 50,000 years ago we shouldn't be making them sort of tools, if you go to the idea that the Anunnaki were here and they taught people, which we believe they did, then that 50,000 years makes complete sense, but not Neanderthals, probably Homo sapiens. This is a private interview with Zecharia Sitchin. I'm just going to play you a bit because sometimes it's easier for someone else who knows more than me to explain what's going on, and then I'll just have a brief chat after.
And then he said there was a period, according to Manetto, of almost 3,600 years of demigods, which meant offspring of the Anunnaki, like the sons of gods in the Bible says married the daughters of men and had children by them, and these would be called demigods.
Right.
And then only began the human civilization with the pharaohs around 3100 BC. So
what he's saying there is that although humans were around, they didn't take power of any kind until the pharaohs. So prior to that, they were still the slaves to the demigods, and then still the slaves to the gods before that, which were the Anunnaki, or Elohim, as he actually refers to in this particular video as well. So if you want to see it, it's called Jordan Maxwell Private Interview with Zecharia Sitchin. So very fascinating, and corroborates a lot of the things that I've tried to be saying throughout these videos. Let's just talk about Nibiru, which NASA calls Planet X. It's also been called the Destroyer. It's called the Blue Star by the Hopi Indians. And it's got different names, but basically it's Planet X or Nibiru. Now, Zecharia Sitchin actually called it the 12th planet, and he wrote a book called the 12th planet. So if you're interested, get the book. Now, here is apparently a pirate video of NASA's, someone leaked it to the internet, of their projections for what happens to Nibiru. So I don't know if you can see here, that says Nibiru. Now whether or not this is from NASA, I don't know, whether someone else done it, but the idea is it shows you here that it slingshots back and obviously passes the sun and Earth. So that's where it's supposed to cause the most damage, and then it goes off back around. Okay, I have this theory that I'd not heard anyone else say, so bear with me and tell me your thoughts at the end of it. So I'm just going to play audio from the Book of Enoch, and tell me whether you think I'm right. Now, no one else has suggested this, so I think this might be right. So I'm going to play the audio, but I'm also going to show this footage here. Now, bear in mind, Stonehenge in the UK isn't the only Stonehenge there is. There was many around the world. A lot of them destroyed, some remnants still there. So just bear with me and tell me what you think at the end of this.
Angel who was with me and is their leader showed to me. And he showed me all the regulations exactly as they are for each year of the world and forever, until the new creation shall be made, which will last forever. And this is the first law of the lights. The light called the sun, its rising is in the gates of heaven that are towards the east.
Heaven is,
and its
it's actually
setting
space.
is in the western gates of heaven. And I saw 6 gates from which the sun rises, and 6 gates in which the sun sets, and the moon also rises and sets in those gates. And the leaders of the stars together with those whom they lead, there are 6 in the east and 6 in the west, all exactly in place, one next to the other. And there are many windows to the south and the north of those gates. And first there rises the greater light, named the sun, and its disk is like the disk of heaven, and the whole of it is full of a fire which gives light and warmth. The wind blows the chariots on which it ascends, and the sun goes down in the sky and returns through the north in order to reach the east, and is led so that it comes to the appropriate gate and shines in the sky. In this way it rises in the first month, in the large gate, namely, it rises through the fourth of those 6 gates that are towards the east. And in that fourth gate, through which the sun rises, in the first month, there are 12 window openings from which, whenever they are opened, flames come out. When the sun rises in heaven, it goes out through that fourth gate for 30 days, and exactly in the fourth gate, in the west of heaven, it goes down. And in those days, the day grows daily longer, and the night grows nightly shorter, until the 13th morning. And on that day, the day becomes longer than the night by a double part, and the day amounts to exactly 10 parts, and the night amounts to 8 parts. And the sun rises from that fourth gate and sets in the fourth gate, and returns to the fifth gate in the east.
Okay, so you see where I'm going with this. So I'm thinking that Stonehenge is actually written in the Book of Enoch, not necessarily the UK Stonehenge, but Henges itself, depicting the calendar year, which is what our astrologers say. Just how smart were the Anunnaki compared to us? I personally think they were about 150 years ahead of us where we are now, but they arrived 450,000 years ago. Now, they had technology, we know that, otherwise they wouldn't have been able to get here. But they also used swords, which you would think, you know, a race that's smart enough to be able to create spaceships to travel from planets. They used axes. Yes, I know we still use axes, and we still got guns. So you could say, well, we still use axes for certain reasons, which is fair. But they also use bow and arrows, as opposed to, unless it's a, you know, a special bow and arrow that fired lightning bolts. So we know that they arrived here in some sort of rocket ships. So why I think that there's a difference between us and them. Now, we use electricity. Nowhere really other than one image in Egypt does it show anything to do with electric in the way that we know electric. Yes, there was the thing called the Baghdad battery, but let's imagine humans didn't discover electric and we carried on with fossil fuels and steam. Would we have been able to fly in 150 years' time from where we are now? Forgetting electric, would we be able to travel to another planet? It's possible. I mean, we was on a trajectory. I mean, everything that we've got now, we kind of had back then, except for communication. That's where the electrics come in. We used to be able to have washing machines. We used to be able to move around in steam engines, cars, trains, planes, even Kitty Hawk, where they first created the first plane, didn't use electric that we use now. So if we didn't have electric, we could have carried on a trajectory where we would have ended up possibly being able to travel to another planet, but not using the electric that we know now. So that's the difference, I think, between the Anunnaki and us. I think they used different types of electric, you know, obviously the power pyramid, but not the same sort of electric that we use. So they are smarter than us, clearly, because we still can't figure out half the stuff they've done. But I don't think they were that far. They're not millions of years ahead like some of the other alien races out there. And that's what I think. What do you think? Let's meet the Anunnaki. So, one by one, here is the dad, Anu, King Anu from Nibiru, the planet Nibiru. He's only came to Earth a couple of times, from what I believe. He is also known as Kronos or Saturn. He had 2 sons and a daughter. The sons were Enlil and Enki. They were some of the first people on Earth that catalogued the area, such as the first 6 days they catalogued water, trees, blah blah blah, and on the 7th day they rested. And Anu is revered as the god of gods because he obviously is the god of gods. So if you think Enlil and Enki are gods, then obviously the god of gods is the dad, and that's him up the top there, right there, with his sons below. So that's a picture of him, and he was a fair guy from what I understand. Let's meet Prince Enki. So he's the son of Anu and brother of Enlil. He was science guy. He was classed as the god of water, which is why his name is also known as Poseidon and Neptune. He was the one that actually suggested to his dad, hey listen, can we create some humanoid type or slaves basically from the indigenous species here, and he's the one that actually created Adam and Eve, so well done to him for us being here now. Now his brother would fight with him a lot over different things, and he ended up moving to Africa, whereas his brother Enlil stayed in Mesopotamia. Prince Enlil, now he's the brother of Enki and son of Anu, and he's a piece of work. Although he was classed as a god because obviously he's an Anunnaki, he was a warring type god. Now he hated the slaves and used the slaves, being humans, and totally used them to make sure they worshipped him and brought him food and everything like that. He was right piece of work. And in fact, it's said that he was the one that brought the flood on to wipe us humans out, because he hated the noise that humans made while he was sleeping and we was too loud for him. Now he had his own temple in Nepal, and that's roughly what the temple looked like. Quite a nice place, wouldn't want to live there. Now I have to say this video is sponsored by a board game this time. It's a board game called The Last of Their Kind, and it's right up our street because it's the sort of things that we that's watching these videos, you and I like. Have a watch of this.
The Last of Their Kind, a free roaming board game like no other. You choose who and how many you want on your team. Each creature has different strengths and weaknesses. Up to 4 can play across a 6-folding board. Many different gameplay options, such as find the key, open the door, and get the jewel before the other players, or last man standing. You choose how many magic cards you have. Only some creatures can cross over the lava and water, or pick up, so choose wisely. Expansion Packs 2 and 3 gives you a new double board and new creatures, allowing up to 8 players. You can also get a level editor with many different tiles. You can create your own layout, whether it's a lava pit or one long tunnel. You can make it how you want. Only available from thegamecrafter.com.
Okay, so just quickly then, yes, I was sent this board game. In fact, all 3 parts, the 2 expansion packs. I've played it twice. Absolutely fantastic. I would only recommend people from the USA to get it because the custom fees was 50 quid. I ended up paying for that. Well worth the price, trust me. But it's probably better for the Americans to buy it because that's where it's actually shipped from. Fantastic, highly recommend it. Thank you. Ninshirag, probably totally pronounced that wrong. She's the sister of Enlil and Enki. She's depicted with a cub, lion cub. However, because of her size, I don't actually think it's a cub. I think it's actually probably a real full-size lion, because you remember they're a lot taller. Now, she goes by another name later on in life, a Nimna. But prior to that, she actually had relationships with her brother, Enki. and they bore a daughter to Enki, or she bore a daughter to Enki called Ninsa. And also she is actually quite important because she was the one that helped Enki, using her womb, to create Homo sapiens sapiens. So she's quite important in the whole history of humans, and so therefore our mitochondrial DNA actually comes from her. I'm just going to address the people that say there's no space out there, there's no outer space, because there's people that keeps posting saying to me that where I'm saying outer space or heaven, which in the Book of Enoch they say heaven, but really it just is translated wrong, should be space. So I'm just going to read something from the Book of Enoch now. Bear in mind, back then they, you know, if you're saying that these were not aliens, then they had no technology to look at the stars, they had no technology to cross up into heaven, or space as we call it. So I'll just read you a paragraph here. I saw at the end of the firmament, which obviously is the atmosphere, clearly, I saw at the end of the firmament the heaven above. So if there's no outer space, what is heaven? What is heaven? There's something outside of the dome then, and you're saying it's not outer space. Is it heaven? Are you telling me that everything outside the dome is heaven, or is it space? By now you're probably working out that the Anunnaki were inbreeding with themselves. So that's the chart here if you just want to have a look through it. Like I say, you got the sister doing things with the brothers and whatever else, and that's basically because they wanted to keep their bloodline 100% pure, going back upwards from the king. Now that all stems from their planet Nibiru, where they wanted to keep their bloodline separate from other families. So that's exactly why they did that. It was a lot of fighting on their own home planets. But this is the Anunnakis, which is Elohim, as we know. That's their sort of tree. But if we go to the Greek side of it, if we're going to pretend that you know, we don't realise that Apollo is such and such, and you know, all these people are actually the same people. This is just an inbreeding chart again, so they are all the same people inbreeding. Ninurta, possibly pronounced totally wrong, he was the god of war and also ploughing of fields, and thunder and lightning, and some laws as well. So I'm guessing these devices here had some sort of electrical discharge, because as we know, Zeus had his thunderbolts as well, and the trident for Poseidon had these three things. So I'm guessing there's some electrical discharge from them. Now his parents are quite interesting because, wait for it, okay, so there's his name there, Ninurta, probably pronounced wrong, and his dad was Enlil, we know is the prince of the princely son of Anu and brother of Enki, but his sister is the one that had their child. So him and his sister had the child, but Ishka, no, he's not a little dwarf, although he does look like one. He's still probably 8 to 10 foot tall, just a bad carving, I guess. Now he was the Sumerian god of thunder and rain, hang on, but in springtime. So really, let's be honest, when we say god of this and god of that, it's just their job at that moment in time. So that's who he was. And his parents, let's go meet his parents. His parents were Enlil, as we know, the main prince that came down, and possibly Ninil. Now, there is some speculation that it was with someone else, but we'll go along with this for now. He's a bit of a character, old Enlil, isn't he? You've heard me waffle on about cuneiform tablets and cylinder seals and Book of Enoch and yada yada yada. Well, I thought I'd just show you how they were actually made. So if you have a look here, there's a gentleman showing you the symbols there represent letters, and that's pretty much what they did. They've done it in clay originally, and the clay would harden, and that would then end up being your information. And that's a cuneiform tablet eventually, once he's done the writing. Now, a cylinder seal is done like this.
They were commonly made of stone, along with faience, shell, or bone. Both cuneiform script and pictorial imagery were carved into the surface. These designs functioned as signatures of individuals or offices that owned them.
So basically they would roll the seal that we just saw a second ago, the cylinder. You know, I say that Sumeria or Mesopotamia is a place that started pretty much everything. So let's just have a quick look. A mass-produced pottery, we can, for a fact, was done there first. The first writing, just happens the first place where the Anunnaki decided to set up was the first place writing came from. No coincidence there. We've also got hydraulic engineering, which is water irrigation, basically. They did that there. A chariot, which was the first place, and notice the wheels on it, round wheels. A plough, so they were teaching us how to plough. Making clothes, textiles, which is what I was saying before. That they do. That's where we learnt to do clothes. They made bricks and taught us how to do bricks. Metallurgy with irons and gold and copper, etc. And mathematics. Enki at some point left Mesopotamia, went to Africa to help with the mining efforts. Look out for Michael Tellinger's books, etc. It tells you that they were there. There's proof that the Anunnaki were there. Enki was the guy that helped create the Homo sapiens sapiens. So our modern history, our modern information, we agree that the first Homo sapiens, which is us, arrived about 300,000 years ago. See, there's a difference of 100,000 years. This is mainstream media. They haven't got a clue. So you might as well just read the old texts and it will actually tell you 300,000 years ago. So it does make sense. And I just have to quickly mention fridge door alarm for $12.99, sponsored by, go on eBay, you can buy it from there. Thank you. If you watch my other videos, and if you haven't, why not, you'll know that I say that there's some indigenous species here on Earth at the same time the Anunnaki decided to make slaves from them using whatever methods they used. And so here's a family tree of what was here. Now there's humans. That's 300,000 years ago. Ignore that line there. That is added because they don't know what to do, because as you see there, it's a missing link. So they've just stuck a line in to make it carry on. But the missing link obviously with humans is these characters here, Homo florensis. I'm not even going to try and pronounce them. Some of these were around 300,000 years ago. So some of these were the ones that ended up creating humans with the DNA or the bearing of children from the Anunnaki. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know what I'm on about. I thought I'd start with the product placement first this time, and this is for that board game that I've played now 3 times. It's absolutely fantastic. It's called The Last of Their Kind, and it's got all the sort of things that we, who's listening to this, are interested in. So I just thought I'd throw it out there. 1 to 4 players if you just buy the original board, but there is expansion packs that makes it up to 8 players. I'll just leave this plan while I explain what the game does. So basically, you choose, you've got up to 13 things that you can start the game with. So in other words, you could have 13 of these characters and each one has different strengths and weaknesses. Or you could have 7 of them and the rest as magic cards, and the magic cards, so basically a total 13. And the magic cards will obviously do things like freeze the opponent or make you move near or subvert it. And there's many different game styles, so you could play all-out war, or you could play capture the flag type thing, or capture the diamond. You can do team games. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so that's enough about the board game. You can get it from thegamecrafter.com. Highly recommend it. Gamecrafter.com. Type in The Last of Their Kind. Okay, so let's go back to the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki had so you know, a tribe in Africa, for example, they have what they call elders, and then they have the younger people, and the younger people do all the work basically, and that's exactly what the Igigi. They were the younger generation of the Anunnaki. Now, obviously, people like Murdoch he was a younger generation, but because his father was one of the princes, then yeah, he became obviously more important than other people out there, other Anunnakis that just had children, in which case those children ended up being what they call the Aigigi. And they were basically used as the workers. So they would transport the gold from Earth back to Nibiru, and so they're basically truck drivers, not slaves, but they weren't treated very well. And Enlil, who was their commander, wasn't very nice to them. So that leads into what happens next with these characters, which was really interesting. I'll tell you in the next video. Don't forget, like, subscribe, do the usual things. Oh, while I've got a few seconds left, go onto YouTube, because I do live chats, and when I've done live chats, they go onto YouTube. So there's a whole hour of me waffling on about serious subjects like this. Here's a really great story for you. So this depiction is of Anzu, also known as Zu, which is ZU. And he was an Anunnaki that was a bit of a troublemaker. And he managed to persuade the Aigigi, which I mentioned in the last video, watch that if you don't know who they are, to allow him on board one of their craft. Now, they were stationed above Earth, and he started to learn some of the mechanics of the ship, etc., and managed to persuade them to send him down to Earth. So he came down on a transport ship and met Enlil and persuaded Enlil that he would be perfect to help them. So Enlil allowed him to work with them, and then he stole the tablets of destiny. Dun dun dun. And he flew off in, I think it's called the Birdwind ship, to the mountains. And the only person that went after him that was brave enough, apparently, is, and I'll tell you in the next video. Following on from the last epic story I was talking about in the last video, the person that went after Anzu or Zu was Ninurta. Yes, Enlil's son. Now, he was the only one brave enough, or probably the only one with any decent weapons, because there was lightning bolts and there was huge battles. So much so that they depicted this in a stone carving, the battle between Ninurta and Anzu. And the lightning bolts and thunder and everything else people could see, humans could see, going on in the mountains. Now, Ninurta beat Anzu, took the tablets of destiny back, dun dun dun, where they belonged, and Anzu had a trial and was sentenced to death. So it was the Igis that requested that they have some sort of rest and relaxation down on Earth, because they'd never been here. And Enlil said, no, you can't have any rest here at the moment. There's nothing built for you. So the Iggy got annoyed, and that's when Anzu, who I mentioned in the last video, or Zu, came over to their ship and managed to persuade them that he'll be their spokesperson, because he was a bit of a thug. And he said he'll go down and talk to him. So that's exactly how he got down there. So of course the Aigi at that point was counting on him to basically speak for them, so that, because their working conditions weren't great and they were really getting annoyed. And they got annoyed so much that they actually at some point or another decided to start a rebellion against them. And guess what happened next? I'll tell you in the next video. And a huge battle ensued in space between the Aigi and the Anunnaki. And yes, this picture's from the Orville. Don't complain that I haven't got a real picture of a space battle that happened so many thousands of years ago, which people do actually, but they do complain to me that these are not the real pictures. But some people say the Aigi was a different race and wasn't actually the youngest of the Anunnaki. So their story goes that it was a slightly different race to the Anunnaki, obviously humanoid, 2 hands, 2 arms, etc. When I say humanoid, Anunnakioid. And they nearly got wiped out. And that's where the Enki come up with the idea, because they didn't have these slaves anymore to work for them, in other words the Aigi, because they'd wiped them out. That's when they come up with the idea to create humans. And see, I don't buy that, because none of the Aigi was on Earth in the first place. So when they did create humans, humans ended up on Earth, and humans didn't man these spacecraft that that was used by the Oigis. So the logic just isn't there. So anyone that says that they were a different race, I don't see it, because the humans then would have ended up being on the spacecraft, and the Oigi should have been on Earth mining, but they weren't, you see. So anyway, my version, which I think is the correct version, is they obviously had a huge battle, and eventually the elders won, and the Oigi had their tail between their legs, but they did they lost obviously people, unfortunately, in the battle, because it got to a war. But they obviously they carried on and worked for the Anunnaki, and we know that because otherwise humans would have been manning these craft and not. And we know one of the only people that was showed any kind of advanced technology back then was Enoch, which is you can see that in his book where he's talking about being shown various things. So no other humans, and he was blessed to be showed these things. So the logic is that the Oigi were young offspring of all different Anunnakis. King Anu wasn't always the king. Alalulu, probably pronounced wrong, was a king before him. Now what happened was Alalulu's predecessor fell out of a window. Yes, on Nibiru they had windows, and died. Now Alalulu then said, I should be rightful heir, but so did Anu. There was a tribunal, and what happened was Alalulu got the position of king, and Anu was sort of head statesman really for the planet. After X amount of cycles, I think it was 3 or 4 cycles of their planet going around our sun, Anu challenged Alalulu, and Alalulu accepted to a wrestling match. They do wrestling as a way of combat to find out who should be king. And Anu beat Alalulu, and Alalulu fled to on a ship to Earth, which is where he found the gold. Alalulu, who found the gold on Earth, went back to Nibiru, told everyone that there was gold on Earth. So he was sort of vindicated, and he came back, I think, with the party of 50 that came to Earth. Now he was respected then because he was the guy that found the gold, and sometime later when King Anu came, there was a wrestling match between the two because Alalulu wanted still to be king. Alalulu lost, and that's the foot there of King Anu. Now once Anu took his foot off, Alalulu bit something very private, and then was banished away, and Alalulu went with his grandson, to Mars. Now that grandson becomes very important later on, so keep watching. After Alalulu bit the private parts of King Anu, he was sentenced by the 7 judges to exile, and so he chose to go to Mars with his grandson. So Alalulu stayed on Mars. Now that brings us to the question, was there life on Mars? Because obviously this is written facts that we can't dispute unless you think it's mythological, someone just writing them for the fun of it, this huge backstory. So if we believe that this is all real, then he stayed on Mars, and the Oigi was there as well. So was Mars inhabited with life back then? Now this was less than what mainstream say. Mainstream say about 4 billion years ago was when the last time it had water on it, but maybe it didn't. Maybe there was that nuclear war that I've mentioned before. Around 415,000 years ago, Ninjarag came to Earth as the chief medical officer. Now she was the sister of Enki and Enlil and son of Anu. Now, she stopped at the away point, which we know is Mars. Now, she found Alalulu, who I mentioned in the last video, dead. But what was interesting is his grandson, who was living on Mars with him, created a face as a tomb for Alalulu on Mars. So that's apparently the face on Mars belongs to him, which is really interesting if that's true. Now, I have to quickly say, yes, that time again, fridgedoораlarm.com. If you go to the site, if you want to just go straight through to eBay, it's just one click from that button, and that's the eBay listing there, only $12.99. And it's got different settings, so it's got a timer setting, but you can also have it so it beeps as you've probably worked out that our ancient past has a lot better storylines than EastEnders. So, Ninshirag, who was on Mars, left Mars to come to Earth, and she was with child, yes. So, her son was Ninurta, who was also Enlil's son. So, remember, they were brother and sister. Technically, they were half brother and sister. Now, they were out of wedlock, which was apparently a naughty thing to have done. Now, if you look at the time scale, there was tens of thousands of years had passed since Enlil had come here to Earth. So you can imagine how long their birth takes if he hadn't, unless he went back, and we've not been told, and I'll have a word with him about that. But no, so we don't know whether he went back, but the first information that she came here is what we've got in our text. Now, she came and she stayed in a place called Sepor, where she became the sort of head medical person. And we can know all of this because actually they've given us maps along with the cuneiform tablets, so we can sort of fairly surely say that this is all correct. Now, there's other places as well that became important around that same time. So this was now getting on to about 360,000 years ago. So bear that in mind. They haven't created man at this point. So 360,000 years ago. This place here, Bad Tiberia, yeah, I'm pronouncing it wrong, was set up to refine the gold that they was getting from Abzu. Now, if you watch the other videos, you know that Abzu is South Africa. Some other notable places is Lagash and Lhasa. What they were kind of set up for incoming spacecraft to, have somewhere to the people, the Anunnaki, to go to. So there were sort of cities that once they arrived, they would go to these places here. And there's Eridu, as I mentioned previously. So it's all heating up now. There's more to come. Don't worry. There's going to be fights and all sorts of stuff. So the Anunnaki have really told us everything that we really need to know. And I hope you're all enjoying it still. I am. Oh, you're going to absolutely love this plot twist. So, 300,000 years ago, Zu, if you remember, was actually the grandson of Alalulu, if you remember, the guy that bit the king's private parts. So the grandson was on Mars, if you remember, where we left the story, and 300,000 years ago, he was the one that actually, after his father had passed, as we know, he was the one that went and helped the Aegi, and then went down to the planet, and then ended up with the fight with Ninurta. So that's the grandson of Alalulu, which kind of makes sense because Alalulu seemed to be a bit of a character as well. So it's all making sense now, and it's far better than TV shows. So keep tuned and I'll keep going. 300,000 years ago, the Anunnaki workers that were mining got really angry and went to Enki and his sister, Ninshirag, I'm totally pronouncing them wrong, and said, look, blah, 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 we don't want to work anymore, our conditions are terrible. So they come up with the idea to create a slave worker, based on the indigenous characters that were on Earth at the time. Now, this is a reconstruction of someone that may have been on Earth. Now, they went to Enlil and suggested this, and they went to their king, which was King Anu, and suggested this idea. But Enlil said, no, absolutely not. We can't make him in our image because it should only be, true bloodline. It should only be the one true creator that could create people like us, blah, blah, blah. But the Council of Seven that do the rulings ruled, yes, create a slave. Enki was in South Africa at the time because he was doing helping with the mining. So they captured some wild men, as they called them, which really were the indigenous species at the time. Now, it could have been Homo erectus, could have been Homo florensis, it could have been any of them, really. We're not 100% sure. So they managed to capture and start doing many tests, many failed. And eventually they managed to create Adam, which, as we know, technically is human as an individual or mankind as a collective. It actually came with a U as well, Adamu, because they always seem to stick funny letters at the end of their words as opposed to what we do, or we shorten them either way. And eventually they managed to create a slave race from the indigenous species using Enki's sister to bear the child from artificial insemination. When I was talking in the last videos about Ninurta, he obviously attacked and beat Anzu or Zu. And that was around 300,000 years ago. Now, obviously, his mum turned up 300,000 years ago to Earth, expecting a child, which was Ninurta. So when we say things like, 300,000 years ago, there could be a difference between 5,000 years, which is quite long. So obviously, by the time Ninurta went off and attacked and beat Anzu, he was probably, in his 20s in their terms as opposed to our terms. So that was that. And also, Ninsharag, probably pronounced wrong, stopped at Mars. Now, she stopped at Mars on the way to Earth 315,000 years ago. Was there atmosphere on Mars at that point? Mainstream media tell us that 4 billion years ago was the last time Mars had atmosphere, but we all know mainstream lie. So, was there atmosphere? Did she land on Mars and stay there for a short period and then move on to Earth? Which seems a logical thing, just to sit in a spaceship on Mars and then carry on to Earth seems illogical. So there must have been some sort of atmosphere there. Now, as some people have said that there was an indigenous race on Mars before they had a war. Now, whether or not that war's to do with the Anunnaki, I'll get to that down the line on other videos. But there seems to be some sort of nuclear war that happened on Mars. And some people say there was an indigenous race on Mars that were the Chinese people, or looked like Chinese people. And they fled Mars and came to Earth. Now, whether or not this was after Ninsharag stayed on Mars, I don't know. So these are good questions to ask, because why didn't they use the Chinese people as slaves as opposed to creating humans on Earth if there was them there at that time? Obviously, if there was radiation from a nuclear war, then Ninsharag probably wouldn't have stayed on Mars. So any thoughts on these, I'd appreciate. There was a feature film called One Anunnaki that was due to be released. It was made in 2004 but never got released in 2006, which is a real shame. Now, if you look on the BFI website, it sort of just gives you who was involved, etc. But for whatever reason, it never got finished or never got released. And that led me to an idea, because I actually am a film director. I've directed 7 feature films. I've directed and produced films. I've edited films. I've done screenplays for other people. I've done screenplays for myself. So I'm quite versed. I was in Pinewood Studios. I had my own studios as well. Obviously this was not some time back, but before I did other bits and pieces, so I do lots of various different things. But then I thought, well, wonder if you guys would be interested if I set up a Kickstarter campaign, which is basically a funding site where you can chip in some money. Would you guys be interested in putting into a Kickstarter campaign? Now, the film would obviously be a feature film, shot primarily for cinema if we can get a distribution company for it, and there'll be parts in there that we can have for you guys if you're interested in being extras in the film. Obviously, if you can act, then let us know. and I would, view your show reels, etc. And if possible, try and cast some of you guys as well. So, what do you think? Do you think the world would be interested in seeing what really happened in a movie format as opposed to what we get told now? Now, obviously, I would, if this was to go ahead, I would obviously collaborate with many of the well-known researchers that we all know and love and have seen on TV, just to make sure that I get it as accurate as possible, because I want people to see who the Anunnaki were, and not sort of be blindsided by what we're told now in sort of the Bibles and things. I would like to go back to our roots. If they can have the Bible and believe how that's written, but I would like to show a proper film showing exactly what's gone on with the Anunnaki. So let me know your thoughts, just so I know whether or not it's worth pursuing a Kickstarter campaign. Would you be interested in putting some money? It's not a lot. Normally people can put anything from sort of £1 to 500 quid if they want to, whatever, but no set limit. But I just want to know your thoughts. Would you be interested if I was to set that up and get the film made? Thanks for your time. This was your god, regardless of whether or not you even believe in religion. So this would have been Neptune or Poseidon, either Greek or Roman, or the original person, which because of their longevity of life, was actually Enki, which was a Anunnaki god. So that's one of the same, the god of water. So the Anunnakis, I'm just going through this because some people still get confused on who people are and what they are in relation. So there was 12 gods which were Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki race is actually called the Elohim. So there was 12 Elohim that called themselves gods, Enki, Enlil, the dad, and so on. Now these were 8 to 10 foot tall, and they were, although they were Elohim and Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, which translates those from heaven, came to earth, but we have to replace heaven for space because we got it wrong when we translated it many years ago. So the Anunnaki are just workers. They're just normal, like we are, me and you, who's watching this now. We're not gods. We're not royal. So these were, the royals, because he was a prince. So they called themselves gods here on Earth. So the Anunnaki are literally just workers, really, or just normal people that live did live on Nibiru, which was their home planet. So we can tell all of that because of the elongated skulls that we found that belong to Anunnaki. Now, a Nephilim is a descendant, an offspring from human women and the Anunnaki. So Anunnaki was, as I say, 10 to 12 foot tall. So once they had relationships, they had offspring, and they became giants, the offspring, and they were called Nephilim. And we know that because the bones from Smithsonian, etc., that it was hidden, and the information that's given to us in ancient texts, cutting down to size, was the same size as a man, human, up to their knees. So that's how big the Nephilim got. Angels are just workers, like military type people for the Anunnaki. So if you hear the word angel, same goes for archangel. They're just a higher up, like a commander or a captain or something. So angels were real. If you read the original text, you can see that they're absolutely real. They're not sort of floating ghosty things. The spirits are different, but angels were just another name for military or police. And a fallen angel is an Anunnaki that had relationships with humans but shouldn't have. So the fallen is a word for sort of disowned or dishonored. Tablet of Destiny. Dun dun dun. So I've mentioned before that Anzu, or Zu as he's also known, stole the tablet away from Enlil and flew off with it, and then was chased, and subsequently they got it back. And at that point, to be honest, I didn't know what the Tablet of Destiny was. So I've done some research. Turns out it's a legal document that was done by King Anu, which was Enlil's dad. And it basically says that Enlil is the supreme god of Earth, the chief god, whatever you want to call him. So that's all it was, and you can understand why Anzu stole it. Now, if you remember, Zu, his dad, or grandfather, should I say, his grandfather was Alalulu, who was a king. If you've watched my other videos, was king prior to King Anu being king, and obviously they got in that fight, and Alalulu bit the private parts of King Anu. So that was his grandfather. So it makes sense why Anzu stole the tablets after his father had passed away on Mars. That was Alalulu passed away on Mars. He then went to the Aigi, then came down and persuaded Enlil that he's a good guy and he'll help work with him, and at that point he stole the tablet. So in other words, he was trying to dethrone Enlil from being the real king of real god of Earth. So that kind of all made sense. Now I just want to throw out something that might be interesting to people. Michael Tellinger, now I know he's in South Africa, or Abzu as it's called, but he does these weekends away, sort of like tours and things, and he does one that's coming up now, and he does them every so often, so it's worth going to his website. If I was in, around in his country at that time, I would love to do this, because I mean, we're talking here about him showing giant stuff and the gold mines and everything else, and proving that there was gold mines, because it's easy for me to say there was ancient gold mines, and people say, well, show me this guy actually does show you them, real ancient gold mines. So give him a look. He's michaeltellinger.com. If you are available and want to go to anyone, and it's not just this date, he does other dates as well, so it's worth subscribing to his website. Okay, hope that helps. I've had people on my posts saying Nephilim, when really I'm talking about the Anunnaki, but they're calling them Nephilim, and I'm like, no, Nephilim are the giants. How can you get it wrong? And then I was trying to rattle my brains, why would people be calling them the Nephilim instead of Anunnaki? Or Elohim, as their rightful names are, the race. And then I remember Zecharia Sitchin's first book, 1976. He called them Nephilim instead of, as well as Anunnaki. But since then, I'll just prove that he's kind of worked out they were the giants.
Excuse me, my teacher, why do you say giants when the word in Hebrew is Nephilim?
So, although the Nephilim are offspring of Anunnaki and humans, technically they are still alien-ish. So they have come from another planet per se, but mixed with us. Okay, so I found a guy on the internet debunking Zecharia Sitchin, and it's actually a person that I sent a message to probably 15 years ago, because he had wrote back then on his website, this was his words, princely seeds was the description of the Anunnaki, not those from heaven came to earth, as possibly suggested by Sitchin. However, a few other people has also gone along similar to what Sitchin's saying, with different variations of those who came to Earth. But this chap was the only one that mentioned that I could see that was saying about princely seeds. Now, I sent him a message back then saying, you do realise that you've actually agreed with Sitchin, meaning that they have to have been Anunnaki, or they have to have been alien, because they were the two princes, Enlil and Enki, which makes sense if you're going to call the Anunnaki princely seeds. And we know from historical texts that their father wasn't around until way later. So they had to have come from somewhere. They couldn't have just appeared. So you see where I'm going with that. If the records show, the true texts show that Enlil and Enki turned up here, then their father wasn't here, so they did come from heaven. So I can see why Sitchin. But here's that chap. Have a watch.
When he makes his translations, like for example, when he translated the word Anunnaki, right? Now, what did I told you that the word means of royal seed, Okay, but he.
Okay, now there's a contradiction there, because when I sent him the message, he said princely seeds. That was. Anyway, he replied, but it was just waffle, and he knew that I was smarter than him, so forgive me for that. But let's just look at this chap here anyway. There he is, David, Dr. David. I won't even pronounce his name. Now, he actually used to work for universities, and one of them was University of California. And those that know my videos know that I do a little bit more research. Turns out our friends, the Rockefeller Foundation, funds that same university, so there's no way he was going to be saying there's aliens, because the Rockefeller Foundation do not want people to know. David does, the one of the sons wanted people to know, but as a whole, the Rockefellers don't want people to know. So when you add the Rockefeller in with a guy that's debunking Sitchin, you know Sitchin was probably more accurate than this guy. That's my opinion. Hopefully you tell me what your opinion is. Thanks. Adam and Eve were created by the Anunnaki, and I've been asked how tall were Adam and Eve. So basically, if you actually look online, it says that they were 91 foot tall. Now, we know that there was giants, but the humans, the Homo sapiens sapiens, were not the giants. And if the Anunnaki allowed 91 foot Homo sapiens to continue, they would have been, there would have been tread on. So the Anunnaki didn't allow a 91 foot, and that's why they actually tried to wipe out the giants, the Nephilim, later on, because they didn't want that kind of mixed bloodline with giants. So they were actually between 4 to 6 foot generally. And we can see, carvings of the Anunnaki there with smaller people, which obviously was the Homo. After Adam with a U was first created, not to get confused with Ali with an I, Princess Nungsharagagag had to keep trying to produce more babies, because, and this is artificially done, because obviously Adam needed to procreate and there was no one around. So the Anunnaki were displeased that their princess goddess was actually doing this and using her womb to sort of pump out babies. So they come up with the idea of using a rib and taking the DNA from that and actually trying to create a female version of Adam, which they did. Enlil found out and told them, right, get them to work in the mines in Abzu, which is where they were, South Africa. So Adam then had relationships with this newfound Eve to produce offspring, but it's not what you think. It's not who you think they are. So Adam and Eve were here 300,000 years ago. Yeah, happy birthday. And since then, we move on now to 200,000 years ago. So 100,000 years had passed. During that period, Homo erectus had unfortunately vanished. Now, whether or not he or she, they were wiped out by humans, by Anunnaki, or just the cold. Now, going up to 200,000 years ago, it started back with the glacial periods again, so it was getting cold, and we can see that there. So it became a difficult time for the Anunnaki, but the humans populated the area, totally did all the mine work now, and were slaves to the Anunnaki, in Abzu and in Eden, which we know is Eden. During this period, the 100,000 years, the Anunnaki were actually having children themselves with themselves. So now we had, Earthling Anunnakis here. It was still around the 200,000 years ago mark when Enki and his son Murdoch went to the moon to see whether or not they can actually do anything there, if it's beneficial or anything, but they found it lifeless and pointless. So Enki's son Murdoch, nothing to do with the A-Team, Murdoch, and Enki around that time also started to work on the celestial timings of our planet. So it's at this point, I believe, that the Stonehenges, not necessarily the one in the UK, but certainly the Stonehenges were starting to be built. And you can see the reference that I made on another video about the Book of Enoch, where they talk about these sort of henges We call them Stonehenges, obviously, but they called them gates, or I believe they called them gates. And it was then that they started to work out the times for the planets and our time. Around 200,000 years ago, Enki was getting annoyed with his brother because his brother pretty much had everything that he wanted. He was the god of the land, whereas Enki was the god of water, and as you know, there wasn't much going on with the water at that time. So Enki promised his son Murdoch that he would try and get him to become supreme ruler instead of Enlil, or at least, you know, some sort of supreme ruler of some description. So Enki went to his father and said, "Dad, can you make Murdoch some sort of higher up person?" He said, "No." He said, "I'm going to give the new spaceport to Enlil's, I think, grandson or great grandson, Utu." So if we look there, there's Enlil, and it goes down the bloodline, and down here Utu got the main gig, and Murdoch ended up in Babylon. Okay, here's a plot twist you wouldn't have seen coming. So we're going to move on to about 100,000 years ago. So that's 200,000 years after Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve, that we all know from the spare rib story, was a human male and a human female, and they procreated and had lots of kids and so on and so forth. Now, Enki, about 100,000 years ago, give or take, saw two women, human women, that he liked. Now, he had his wicked way with them, and so that's possibly the first interrelationship between Anunnakis and humans. So it was actually Enki that possibly started that, and the two women actually gave birth to a boy and a girl. And obviously you're wondering what their names were. Their names were, Adam and Eve again. But this time they were, so Adam's human and Eve's obviously female woman. But look, that's the names, Titi and Adpa. Now, you've got to ask yourself, how tall were these children? Because we know the sons, as they in the Bibles, etc., sons of the Anunnaki were tall. They became the Nephilim, the giants. So Enki actually took the two children back to Eden. Yes, so now we've got a sort of a double type story of Adam and Eve. So we've now got a real Adam and Eve, as well as the Adam and Eve with the rib. So this is where the Bible obviously may be getting mixed up. So we've now got Enki's Adam and Eve. So now we've got the two new children from royal blood that grew up. There's no real description of their heights. I don't think it was the 91 foot high, but they were classed as royal blood. Now this could explain why some people on this planet has Rh negative, if these Adam and Eve had a bloodline, and obviously that bloodline, we'll talk about bloodlines later on, and that bloodline became sacred compared to the other humans that were around at the time. The new royals, Adam and Eve, which were human half-breds, actually had children together, and we know the story of Cain, Abel and Seth. Because these were Enki's children, or grandchildren as the lineage went on, Noah was the one that Enki had said, "Look, build a boat, because we're trying to, I'm trying to save you." Because this is so important, I thought I'd go over it again. So, Enki, the alien that came down to Earth about 300,000 years ago, created the first human from a Neanderthal, which is what I'm pointing the camera at now. So he created the first Adam, which was a hybrid of the Neanderthal possibly and the Anunnaki, and then they created a female version. Now them two ended up having kids and so on, and worked in the mines, and they lived for probably about 50 years or less than that even. Now that's the Adam and Eve that we know of that was created with the rib. So the Adam and Eve that we actually know here that lived for a lot longer was because Enki, 100,000 years ago, that's 200,000 years after Homo sapiens sapiens were working in mines, gold mines for the Anunnaki, and roaming the lands, etc. So that's 200 years after. That's 100,000 years ago. Enki had relationships with 2 human women and had 2 children by the 2 different women. One had a boy and one had a girl, Adam and Eve. Although that's not their real names. Look at my last video and it explains what they were actually called. But so Adam and Eve is just basically man and female. Now, Enki looked after these children because they were his bloodline, and he was the prince. He was also classed as a god. And that is why we have a record of their lineage, of who they had children with, and so on and so forth, which you can see here. Whereas the first humans, the Adam and Eve that we just spoke about with the rib, they had no one bothered writing anything for them. They, 300,000 years ago, they were just slaves. They were born to be slaves. But because Enki wanted to look after them, because they were now his sort of offspring, that's the reason why we now have this information here with a lineage. And that could also suggest why there's different coloured skins. Now, I'm not going to say which way round, because people seem to be angry if I don't say it the way they want them to be. But so you've got Neanderthal and Anunnaki produced humans, which might be one skin colour, and then you had the Anunnaki actually having proper relationships instead of genetically modifying with human women, which produced Adam and Eve, which could have been a different skin colour. So this is how we may get skin colours. To back up my claims that there are 2 Adam and Eves that we know of. So the first Adam and Eve was the first Homo sapiens sapiens 300,000 years ago, genetically modified by the Anunnaki. So we know that, there's pretty much proof of that. But that doesn't mean that they were the Adam and Eve that we know, because their time span 300,000 years ago, the Great Flood was supposedly only 4,359 years ago. So there's a difference of 295,000 years. Now, if we look at their bloodlines, they didn't live that amount of time, 130 years, 135, and so on. So they wouldn't have been able to be here for the flood if the flood was that amount of time away when they were born. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why there was 2 lots of Adam. If we agree that the Anunnaki in one form or another created humans, whether or not it was DNA in a test tube or whether it was breeding with them, if we agree that that's possible, the chances of that the Anunnaki's DNA matched and was able to actually produce any humans from the indigenous species on Earth at the time is pretty remarkable, in the fact that you could actually have 2 species very similar. Now, Zecharia Sitchin in his book 12th Planet suggests that Nibiru, billions of years ago, before it had proper life on it, smashed into Earth before we had proper life on it, and it created life because there was life, some small resemblance of life on Nibiru, and then that got transferred to Earth. And so he then says that, obviously down the line, we've all got the same sort of DNA, etc. Now, I struggle with that, and I mean, I am a fan of Sitchin's, but sometimes I have to say something that doesn't quite work out. So what he's saying is, because the Anunnaki has the same DNA structures, and we all came from the same microbes, or the same creatures that came from the splitting of the 2 planets, the hitting of the 2 planets, he's saying that therefore Neanderthal and the Anunnaki should be able to breed in some fashion, which is what he's suggesting. But the problem with that is we can't breed with sheep, we can't breed with any other animal other than humans on Earth. So he's saying that the Anunnaki could quite happily breed with Neanderthal or one of those species, but I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but the logic doesn't make sense, because it's just one creature on this whole planet. Now, if Neanderthal wasn't here, the Anunnaki wouldn't have been, if none of those 4 species, Homo florensis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal was here at the time, then they wouldn't have been able to do it, because no other species on this planet would have been able to have the same structure that they could have done that with. They couldn't procreate with any other species on this planet. So I'm hoping you understand what I'm trying to say. So he's saying that they could, but I'm saying there's only one species, and they were very lucky that should actually match. So I don't think it's the planet. Obviously, if you don't understand what I'm trying to say, I'm struggling here trying to articulate it, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. Let me know in the comments if you sort of understand. Otherwise I'll do another video and maybe rephrase it a lot better. Sorry. A question I often ask myself is, how come the Anunnaki are so smart yet they couldn't have robots? And a few people have asked the same question now, so I thought I'd address this. Now, we're never gonna really know the answer to all of this, but we can look at this together. So we know they're advanced enough to have space travel. So if we break this down, so on their planet they may have had different materials to us on Earth. For example, they may have had rocks and stones, just like we've got quartz. They may have had, and we've got magnetic stones that can hold magnetic forces. They may have other materials that can do similar sort of things, but maybe even produce energy. So they could have based their whole civilization on, for example, a magnetic system. Now, if we didn't have electric, and bearing in mind electric's only fairly recently, we would have still been using steam-powered or gas or coal. So if we rule out electric, would we have got to the moon without electric? We probably would. We probably would have found a way to get to the moon using some other methods. It may have took a little bit longer, but we probably would have done it without electricity. So that's one reason why they could have space travel. They could be, the rockets and everything that they're using may not necessarily have electrical components. It may literally be gears and levers, just like in the olden days when planes used to have gears and levers before they started to have electronics. So we can say, okay, maybe they're advanced in some ways. DNA. Now, they're obviously been around a lot longer than us because they created us, so they have probably got to that point now that they can figure out DNA just as we have. Stone structures. Now, they've obviously got stone structures on their planet just from the ancient texts, so they've been building stone structures for a long time, way longer than we have, and now we just sort of use concrete and things like that and robots to build structures. But if they manually did it themselves, then they would have that down to fine precision. Levitation. Now, they have got levitation, I totally believe, using sound acoustics. So again, if they didn't have electricity and they were forced to use other means of devising technical equipment, then levitation using sound wouldn't be a bad thing to do. That way they wouldn't need these big digging machines and things like that we have now. And they obviously know about the ley lines. I'm guessing they probably got ley lines on their planet because they knew exactly where to build the ancient monuments directly on ley lines to enhance the power from the Earth. I'll carry this on the next video. In my last video, I was just showing how the Anunnaki could be advanced, but yet slightly behind us in some ways. So I'm just going to move on to the not advanced now. So we know they use swords. There's many depictions of them. They talk about them, etc. So why not a ray gun? Again, that would require some sort of small energy device that they may not have. They may not have grasped lasers or even sort of the electric that we understand as electric that we're using now. They may be using a different form of electric, which is based from the Earth, which I mentioned earlier. So swords would be plausible for a race that don't have the technology to build lasers. And yes, you could say, well, why didn't they build guns? But maybe they're not as war race like as we are. We are a very war race. So that to me, that, you know, that's logical. So they come from the stars, but just because they come from space doesn't mean they have to have ray guns. Now they used boats, and this is to move some of the stones around, and they did actually do that. I know later on, obviously in Egypt, we 100% know they did that, but at the time they were supposedly using boats to move things around. And no, not to the underworld, as the story goes. But yeah, they did use boats. And why didn't they use their flying machines that they've got? Personally, I think they probably had a limited number of these craft instead of an unlimited number. And I don't think the craft were, because of they used rocket fuel of some description, because we know this from the ancient texts and about the fire and the light that comes from the back of their flying device. So, you know, are they just going to keep using all their fuel? We don't know where their fuel comes from. It may have come from their own home planets. They may have been bringing their fuel here just to power their ships to take the gold back to their. So I can understand boats. It's a logical thing. We still use boats, even though we've got, you know, aeroplanes and things. Their language is another one that's actually not very advanced. So when you break down, say for example, the Book of Enoch, they would write things like, and in those days, you know, it's a lot of wasted language. I mean, we're now getting to the point where we type M8 for mate. So they have a lot of sort of wasted language, I think, so that makes them slightly behind in language compared to we are now, I think. I might be wrong. I'll carry this on the next video. Just following on from the last two videos about the Anunnaki and their advanced tech, or lack of. So, have a look at this gentleman's nice beard. And most of them are, I think pretty much all of them are depicted with a beard of some sort, possibly except for the Aegis, which were the younger ones. So obviously a beard is a stature for them, I would imagine. Now, I've put down here razor blades, so I'm just obviously joking there, but they obviously didn't want to cut their beards, so it's and it wasn't just for the gods. I think the other Anunnakis also had the beards. So then you got to the last category, which was they possibly had but maybe eroded away. So the logic would suggest that they should have had roads, certainly in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, where they first set up base, which was one of the longest running locations for them. But there's not really evidence of roads as such, so they didn't tarmac it. Obviously paths were made, but they didn't put these down as a longevity type of thing. Even though they were here for hundreds of thousands of years, you would have thought they would have done something different, but they didn't. And there's no records of that to show, you know, their sort of road structure. Obviously Romans came along and started building roads, but the Anunnaki, who was here a lot longer than the Romans, didn't. Now you've got to ask then, why didn't they do long-term structures? And that someone else actually asked the same question. They said, well, why are they not here now? Same reason that they came here. They wanted one thing, and they got that one thing, and then they bugged off. So they weren't here to set up a home. They weren't here to take over the planet. They were here to get the gold to help their own planet. So once they've done that, that's it. So there was no need for them, even though they was here for hundreds of thousands of years, there was no need for them to build permanent structures. You could argue, well, the pyramids are permanent, but that was to help them. It wasn't permanent structures like we build now, like we build all sorts of rubbish structures that we don't actually use, and I mean O2 and things that we, you know, we don't build. They didn't build needless stuff. And the other thing is cables or wires. I'm sure they had the ability to have them, because there was some descriptions in Egypt, for example, of some sort of cable-looking things. But these would have, over hundreds of thousands of years, they would have totally eroded away. So we would never know really if they had some sort of wire capability of whatever it is that they would be using that wire for. So I hope you've enjoyed these few videos on power and tech. to back up my theory that there was two Adam and Eves, the first one 300,000 years ago, genetically modified by the Anunnaki. They had children, and those children had children, and spread throughout the planet, and that was 300,000 years ago. Then you've got within 100,000 years, Enki had relationships with the Earth women that was produced 300,000 years ago, and they had children, and those children were Adam and Eve, and then those children had children, Cain, Abel, Seth, etc. Now, that lineage went right up to Noah, and we know that the flood possibly happened around 5,000 years ago, give or take. So have a watch of this video here.
Mapping the human genome, Dr. Hawks found that in the past 5,000 years, our DNA has evolved at a rate 100 times greater than any previous 5,000-year period in our history.
So what happened in the last 5,000 years?
So what actually happened there, then it corroborates my story, is that the Adam and Eve and the Noahs then had children. So now you've got two different types of species on this planet. One which was 300,000 years ago, which was genetically modified, and now you've got the Anunnaki, true bloodline of the Anunnaki, creating that different DNA strand, which is why in 5,000 years, which is when the flood happened, give or take, there was a blast of new life on this planet which had different DNA to the previous 300,000 years. So I hope that kind of makes sense for you. Don't hate me for what my findings suggest. So 300,000 years ago, first man and woman were hybrids from Neanderthal. The Anunnaki created that, and their offspring from those first 300,000 years ago worked in the mines in South Africa. Then go along to sort of 100,000 years or 60,000 years, not 100% sure. The Anunnaki then bred, certainly Enki did, with two human women that was originally one of those type, and they had Adam and Eve, and now those Adam and Eve were in the Middle East. Now this could explain the colour difference between people in one place to another. While Enki had his children there, he wanted to teach them. He believed that these his offspring were able to be taught, so he took them to Eden and taught them and clothed them. I want to know what your thoughts are now. You've probably watched all my videos. If not, why not? Now, what do you think? Do you think I'm on the right track? The Anunnaki were really here? Or do you still think that there's sort of one main god? Or do you not believe in either? And I'm also interested to know if you was the believer of one sort of true god and then watched my videos, have you changed your thoughts? Just let me know what you think. I'm really interested to know how you know, if any of this has persuaded you or made you open your eyes. Let me know. Continuing on from 100,000 years ago, then the Anunnaki were taking the gold back to their home planet and sprinkling it in their atmosphere, which seems to have been working, so yay, well done to them. Now, the reason why it's said that their planet had dwindled in atmosphere is written that it's possibly to do with a volcano. Now, there's also another name for a pyramid, which is volcano. So the story sort of goes like that the volcanoes that were active started to become dormant, and that's what's caused the problem. But logic would have said to me the other way around, that the volcanoes were active, and that's what's caused the problem. But either way, it seems to have been working, and they continued mining for gold. You ain't gonna believe what Adam and Eve did. Well, Eve stayed on Earth, but Adam, or Adapa, was actually taken to Nibiru, the planet Nibiru, by Enki. And while on the planet, he was treated very well because he was actually part royal blood now because of being Prince Enki's son. And King Anu gave him some seeds, plant seeds, etc., corn. So when he come back, he would be able to start growing some barley type wheat, and etc. And they also showed or gave Adapa some way of creating domesticated sheep for when he returned back here, so he would have the ability to grow wool, etc. This is for the people that say to me, where does it say what I'm talking about in the Holy Bible? So I'm just going to sort of educate you guys. You do realise that the Holy Bible is a copy of ancient texts, all types of texts, Sumerian, Aramaic, Babylonian. So these texts here are 4,000 plus years older than the Bible. So you can see, obviously, that these came first. So once you realise these came first, and you realise that the Bible is a copy of these, unfortunately, some things that they weren't great at translating back then, and some things that they wanted to hide from you guys for whatever reason. And we know that because the Bible, the Ethiopian Bible, actually had a lot of the proper ancient texts correctly, including the book of Enoch. Unfortunately, there seems to be a problem with people changing the Bible as it goes along, even though the Word of God was never supposed to be changed. But so unfortunately, the Bibles that you've got are missing loads of information. Now, just to sort of help you guys, there's websites out there that actually are trying to catalogue the ancient text, so you can actually then see that everything is based on the original ancient text, even the Bible. So when someone says to me, where does it say it in the Bible? Like I say, unfortunately, people, humans, for whatever reason, whether it's greed or just didn't want people to know our true history, they changed the Bible. Don't hate me for this. It's not me. I'm just telling you it's true. You know that by reading many different Bibles. There's things being taken out of it. Enoch ends up virtually, in the last Bibles, virtually only mentioned once, I believe. So just remember, when you say to me, where does it say it in the Bible is not the be-all and end-all. You have to go back. You have to do a bit of research, unfortunately, and you'll see that it was written originally in the ancient texts before the Bible even came along. So I hope this helps for people that say to me, where is it in the Bible? When Adam came back from the planet Nibiru, he mated with Eve, and they had 3 children, Cain, Abel, Seth, and possibly others. Now, Adam brought back some wheat and barley, etc., from their home planet, and Cain became a farmer and was helped by Ninurta, who we all know of if you've watched my other videos. So he became the farmer, and Abel started to look after the livestock, which was also possibly brought back from the planet Nibiru by Adam, and he was helped by Murdoch, probably pronounced wrong. So you can see how this whole story now plays out properly, makes more sense than what you read, unfortunately, in the watered down, copied and changed Bible. Cain and Abel. So we all know the story of the brothers. So what actually happened was they both took their products, which was corn and wheat, etc., that they produced, and animal livestock, to Enlil and Enki. Enlil was very happy with the work that they had done. Clearly they could be taught, they were smart, and he was very happy and praised them. Enki only praised Abel for whatever reason. So Abel then started to taunt Cain many a time, saying, Enki, thinks we're wonderful, blah, 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 or thinks I'm wonderful. And that ended up in a fight. And that fight lasted until, well, we know what happened. One of them got whacked with the stone and died. Hands up, who knows which one died. After Cain killed Abel, he was very upset. Eventually news travelled to Enki, who was very, very upset, very angered, and so was Murdoch, and probably Ninurta too. So it was a whole big thing. So Murdoch actually wanted Cain to be executed, but they decided to go with the judges of 7, which I've mentioned before. And the 7 was about to put Cain to death, but Enki ruled and said, no, look, let's banish him instead because he's sort of royal bloodline. You know, we can keep him going, whatever, but let's just banish him. So he managed to persuade the Court of Seven to banish Cain. So Cain left a place called Eden, or Eden, as we all know it was called. After Cain was banished, he went off to different lands. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that over 300,000 years ago, the first Adam and Eve was created, and those people had children, and those children had children, etc. Right up for over 200,000 years before Cain was around, they had kids, etc. So when Cain went off to different lands, he actually ended up mating with one of those other types. So where Cain is a descendant of an Anunnaki and human, he mated with a descendant of Neanderthal and Anunnaki, if that makes sense. He had children with this person, and eventually he died from a stone falling on him. I'm guessing they were trying to build something, and obviously didn't have the same technology that the Anunnaki did. So that's the end of Cain. If you're interested, there's a good site that has just sort of a timeline that you can actually scroll and scrub across. So here we're talking where it believes the deluge came from. Now, mainstream sort of say possibly 5,000 years, whereas this is saying 10,000 years ago. But you can scroll across and have a look what happens in different timelines. So the link to that, I'll paste it as well, is this link here, time.graphics/line/240.833. I'll pin it to the comments. Just trying to show that the Anunnaki were 8 to 10 foot tall. If you look at any of the ancient buildings that the gods supposedly lived in, you'll see that the doorways or the arches are all approximately 13 foot or taller, and that's because although the Anunnakis are 10 foot, they used to wear hats as well. So you know, you can go down to Egypt as well, you can go to Rome, Greece and so on, and you'll see that all these doorways that they have, these archways for the gods, are absolutely huge, and that kind of makes sense when the Anunnaki are that tall. Technically, Adam and Eve were Nephilim, giants. Now, mainstream sort of say they were 91 foot tall. I wouldn't have said they were that tall. I would have said they were tall but not that tall. But that's when, around that time, is when other Anunnaki started having relationships with humans, which created the Nephilim, the giants. So here it says in Genesis, the sons of God. Now that would have been Marduk, Ninurta, people like that were the sons of God. However, the normal Anunnaki also had relationships with the beautiful women that it says in the Bible, human women, and they are. Now, as we look through different versions of the Bibles, obviously it translates differently. You've got Nephilim or fallen angels. Now, the fallen angels were the Anunnaki, the deposed Anunnaki. So forget the word angels. It was just deposed Anunnaki that had relationships. They shouldn't have had relationships, and therefore they were classed as the fallen angels. The third son of Adam, Seth. Now, very little spoken about Seth. Now, the dad, Adam, was about 130 years old when he had Seth. Now, that would actually make sense, because if he is a genetic, Adam was a genetic offspring, not DNA offspring, from one of the Anunnakis that lived for a lot longer than us, then 130 years makes sense. Now, if you look at Adam and Eve's lineage, going down to Noah, they all lived a lot longer than we do now, so that would make sense if they were half Anunnaki. Now, there's very little said about Seth, other than his mum and dad eventually ended up after him. He was the last one that was written about. After him, apparently, his mum and dad, Adam and Eve, had 30 more children, women, female, and 30 more male. So 60 more children, but no one wrote about those. You want to know if the giants were real in the ancient times? Well, let's look now at who was talking about the Nephilim, which were the offspring of Anunnaki and humans, which ended up being giants. Now, it wasn't just the Bible that spoke about them. So native tribes Native American tribes actually talk about them being 40 to 60 foot tall. Some are actually, they say, 150 to 200 foot tall and could catch whales the way a human would normally catch a fish. So let's have a look, because obviously, you know, are these people, are these native tribes making up these stories? Just look how many there are. I mean, I'm just you know, just going through here. The list goes on. So these are just Native Americans. I'll get to other cultures in a moment. Who else talked about the giants? Well, in the Bible, the word Nephilim means giant in the Hebrew dictionary, according to Zachariah Sitchin. Now, we can look down and see that the word Nephilim is said in a couple of places in Genesis, and it's referring to the Nephilim as giants or fallen ones. Now, the fallen ones were the fathers, as I mentioned many a time before, and they were the Anunnaki that shouldn't have had relationships with humans. But who else is talking about the giants in those days? Enoch talks about giants and actually describes them as approximately 450 foot high, which is absolutely huge. Gilgamesh was also classed as one of the giants, and I will cover Gilgamesh as I go along on the different videos about the Anunnaki. England had its share of giants. Now, this is a chalk carving, not the real one. This is obviously a fake picture with something covered up, but it was an absolutely massive chalk carving carved in the hillside, and this is fairly ancient. But there was also talk that Noah's son Ham came to the UK after the flood, and Noah's lineage, obviously, as we know, were Nephilim, because they were sons and daughters of human people and the Anunnaki. Now, here's a picture here that was done back in the 1150 AD, and it says here Merlin being assisted by a giant at Stonehenge. Now, we know Stonehenge is older than 1150, so obviously they're taking some liberties here, but the point is that they mention a giant, and that's not the only giant in the UK that's been mentioned. Giant stories require giant lies. Now, if these are lies, then they're pretty much worldwide, because this giant story is based in Wales at the time of Camelot with King Arthur, and this one's called Yazbabaden. I've probably pronounced that wrong because it's Welsh and I'm terrible at pronunciations. But what I'm trying to show here is that all around the world there is different stories. Now, in the UK, there was a poem called The Ruin, written in the 8th or 9th century, which is obviously going back some time. And again, that talks about giants. Now, the giants are worldwide. Now, if we take the fact that they were probably 100,000 years ago when the Nephilim started to appear because of the Anunnaki having relationships with humans, that's 100,000 years ago. That's a lot of time to move around the planet. They couldn't. Have you heard of the giant Finn McCall? Well, supposedly there was a giant back in ancient times that lived in Ireland near the causeway and was said to be about 54 foot tall, which is about 16 metres, which is absolutely huge. And he lived on the causeway, or the stories go that he was near the causeway, which are these sort of steps, really weird shaped steps. Now, modern scientists say that it's volcanoes that's done that. But the stories go that he built these so he could cross over to Scotland from Ireland, because from where these are, it's a very short distance to Scotland. And he built them so he could see his giant girlfriend. Now, let's just see if there was any evidence in Scotland of anything giant. Yes, this giant sword, genuine giant sword, was found to be from the 15th century and was found in Scotland. So we're connecting the facts now that there possibly was giants. For those of you that are interested in our true history, and I mean proper history, not what mainstream or even universities teach us, but actual, let's get back down to the nuts and bolts of aliens, ancient aliens, giants, Bigfoot, all that kind of good stuff. I put it together in a way that hopefully you'll eventually understand that, yes, maybe mainstream has been lying to us. Now, I've also got a YouTube channel if you don't want to watch them all on TikTok. So there's over 400 videos at the moment, and I also do live chats as well, which I put onto YouTube, so you can watch them and find out all about our real, true history. So feel free to join us. Go back and watch it from video 1 onwards, because I cover Planet X, which is what NASA calls it, which is another name for Nibiru, a planet that's in our solar system apparently. But watch the videos and you'll make up your own minds. So feel free to join us. Hope to see you soon. Goliath the Giant. Now, we've all heard stories of him and how he got beaten, but supposedly he was between 6 to 10 foot tall. Now, there's no actual records, so this is just a guess. But if he was between 6 to 10 foot tall, that makes him the same height as an Anunnaki, which then makes me think, okay, maybe he wasn't an actual Nephilim giant, you know, which can go 20, 30, 40, 50, 450, as we've heard in some of the other videos, foot tall. So if he was about 10 foot, he could have just been an Anunnaki, and he could have been a soldier or something like that. Now, was he real? Well, they actually, back in 2005, found some pottery with the word Goliath on it in the same area, and it dated, give or take, about 70 years from the time of Goliath was there. So certainly the name suggests he was there, or someone with his name. Greek mythology or fact. Now, this is a cyclops called Polymathus, probably pronounced wrong, and he supposedly was the son of Poseidon. Now, we all know who Poseidon actually was, Enki, an Anunnaki, and Thusa, I think her name is. And now that would make sense again, because the giants were offspring of the Anunnaki, so Enki could have had another child and it could have been this. Now, we can see that there's possibly a deformity happening, because nowhere in the other descriptions were the Anunnaki only had one eye. So this stands that, you know, there is deformities going on with them. Now, he was also a cannibal in terms of eating little humans. There's no real height to him. No one's sort of said 100% how tall he was, but apparently he was massive, and he would eat people. Another story of giants, this time in Malta, stroke Gozo. Now, this is called the Temple of Giants, or Giants Temple, and it was supposedly created by a female giant, possibly a cyclops, and the story goes that she pushed up these boulders by her own bare hands while having her baby straddled to her back, which is pretty impressive. Malta having giants isn't so far-fetched when you realise that some of these huge ancient monuments that they've built have stones that are 22 tons. Now, that's pretty impressive for a tiny little island, and they're again made of limestone, which would go back to my theory of levitating. But anyway, Malta's also got the elongated skulls, which I've suggested are Anunnaki, and they're missing the sutra there. So Malta had giants and Anunnaki arrive there, which makes sense. You think you're so smart. Where's the evidence of the Anunnaki or giants or any of their technology? Well, have a watch of this.
Flowers would travel up and along abandoned towers.
Just 30 years.
After 30 years, the satellites we sent up to explore would fall back down to Earth with no one to collect their data.
So I'm showing here what happens if humans left the Earth, just like the Anunnaki left the Earth.
Drastically. By year 60, marine life would have nearly recovered from decades of overfishing and would
230 years after humans would leave the Earth.
Huge forests will have reclaimed the eastern half of North America, and the only evidence we ever existed would be leftover steel and plastics. Once glorious landmarks would slowly succumb to decay.
So you can see that the Anunnaki stuff would have disappeared unless they had plastic.
The natural world would have succeeded in erasing most of the final traces of human existence. Of course, even after 25,000 years, some of our
When you add the actual correct translations of words in the Bible totally changes from what you believe it was. So let's have a look here. There's a website here that can actually go from English to Aramaic, which is fine, that's great. But let's have a look at just some of the words that were wrong in the Bible that obviously back then they didn't know the other words for it. So heaven should be the word space. So when next time they say they looked up in heaven, it was space. Angel is really a guard, a physical being, a guard or a policeman type thing. It's an Anunnaki real person, but it's a military of some sort. Holy angel is just a superior version, so in other words a superior guard. Archangel is a commander or a captain, again still Anunnaki. Firmament is the word atmosphere, not a dome, not a solid thing. Elohim is actually the Anunnaki's real race. I've often been asked, if the Anunnaki are so smart, why did they use stone to write stuff down? Well, that's because stone doesn't degrade like everything else that we use. So actually they are smarter than us, because we use pen and a piece of paper. And how long does... Look at your receipts, put that in your wallet, and 5 months later you can't see what you actually bought. Now there's a website here that shows how long it takes things to biodegrade. Obviously out in the elements. So if you scroll down here, wool socks, for example, 1 to 5 years. Plastic coated milk cartons, 5 years. Leather shoes, 25 to 40 years. So the only things that will last a long time is glass bottles, styrofoam and plastic bags. Now the Anunnaki's we've not found anything that the Anunnaki's used of any of them. So that's why they used stone, because stone... I think you should be able to see ghosts and spirits, but we can't, because we've been suppressed by, unfortunately, our governments. Now, the Book of Enoch talks about spirits a lot, as you can see, but one particular passage here, it says, and I'm just using one, they see him a lot, I saw the spirit of a dead man. Now, children... can actually recall past life regressions as well, but as they get older something happens to them, something that causes their memories to go. Could it be fluoride, for example, that's stopping us seeing spirits and causing us to forget our past lives? Because they do. Fluoride that's in our water, given to us free of charge, thank you very much. Don't ask where the fluoride comes from, it's disgusting. So are they dumbing us down? Here, look, some people believe that it hinders the neurodevelopment in children, and that's fluoride, and that's just one of the things that they put into our... We need to know where the humans moved to when they were created. So this is Adam and Eve, but this is the Adam and Eve that was created by the Anunnaki. It's not the Adam and Eve that Enki had as children, which was around this sort of area. Now this was Africa, which is fine. So the African people, which were the ones created first 300,000 years ago. You can see there's different on this particular map. Now, this particular map doesn't take into account that the Anunnaki were around. This is saying that 300,000 years ago, the very primitive man made these massive boats that could then take them across the oceans and all different places. Yeah, that didn't happen. So what actually happened was, obviously, the Anunnaki was taking these people, humans, from one place to another. So it starts off here, which is the indigenous Homo sapiens created by the Anunnaki. And this is where logic shows mainstream's a bit silly. So they're saying that 65,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens that were created by the Anunnaki then left there, travelled across the ocean here. Look at that. Oh my God. All the way across, all the way up here to here. Instead of saying that the Anunnaki took them there in their ships, spaceships, they actually said that they crossed there at 65,000 years ago. Now, hunter-gatherers, 12,000 years ago. So they're saying that at 65,000 years ago, which were way before hunter-gatherers, they managed to get on boats and build boats and stuff. So this is this is why what I'm saying, unfortunately, seems to be correct, as opposed to listening to mainstream. So you've now got two lots of humans interbreeding, where they was crossing over into Mesopotamia from Africa. Now this map here shows the timescales of where people moved around the planet, and that's fine, except you just have to disregard them travelling across the oceans like that. Now there's two types of people that we're talking about at the moment. There is the Anunnakis created the human hybrids, which were in Africa. Then you've got the Anunnaki that had relationships with those and created their offspring. So now you've got two offsprings. Now, when the Anunnaki moved people around, both of those other two ended up breeding with each other. So now you've got technically three different races. Now, the ones that there were slaves that the Anunnaki had created pretty much were slaves and ended up being slaves all around the places that they needed to take them to. The ones that, for want of a better word, that were smarter, only possibly because the Anunnaki decided to teach them, because they were the offspring of the Anunnaki, the offspring of the Anunnaki were more European, shall we say, and that's where they ended up staying, which is why you have Mesopotamia, so it's sort of like the Middle East area. Then you've got their offspring between them and the people that was in the Abzu, and they travelled further because they weren't sought after by the Anunnaki. In other words, the Anunnaki kind of looked after their own offspring from humans and the ones that they'd created 300,000 years ago. But their offspring, between the two human types, they ended up travelling off, which is, we can see that in not only these maps, but we can actually see that in different skeletons where we've got different types of European people back then, which gives the reason why this map's got a different coloured chart. So this all makes more sense than people travelling on boats around the world. Now this is where it starts getting a bit tricky. So the people from India, I personally think that they were offspring of the Anunnaki's offspring and the humans that were created 300,000 years ago. So now you've got a different type of human on this planet, an extra one. And then those type also then bred back with the offspring of the Anunnaki, and so on. And this is how we ended up with this diverse population. Now, mainstream actually say that the people from India actually migrated from Africa, which would make sense, along with my lines there, that all these now different types of breeding went on, and they ended up settling in that sort of area there. Now, the mainstream tells you where Chinese people come from, and I'll talk about that in the next video. We need to look at where all the different types of humans come from. So the first human was, and we'll call them A, and that was created by the DNA of the Anunnaki and Neanderthals to make number A. B, which is the second lot of humans, were the Anunnaki having relationships with A, which created B. Third humans, we'll call C, was actually now A and B having relationships together to create C. And fourth was D, which was A, which was the first humans again, and Neanderthals and other types of hominids at the time. So as you can see now, we're getting different colour skins, etc. So then there's Neanderthals and the Denisovans, I probably pronounced wrong, which created the unknown humans, which mainstream admit that there is humans that was unknown. So then you've got F, which is unknown plus A, and then you've got unknown plus B, unknown. Where did the Chinese people come from? Now, there's a theory that they came from Mars. They were indigenous to Mars, and they left Mars when Mars was having attacks by whoever it was that was attacking them. But I kind of go along more with the mainstream, which say that after studies, 97.4% of the genetic makeup is from the ancestral modern humans. That's the people I was talking about that would have been the slaves in the Abzu. So watch my other videos if you have no idea what I'm on about. Plus, so modern humans, plus they're also mixed with Neanderthals and I can't pronounce that. But so watch my last video. It explains how they all are mixed together, which creates all these different races that we've got. Some of my videos are now being pulled off of TikTok before they've even been released, so go to YouTube, subscribe, they'll be on. To prove my theory is correct, that the indigenous species breeded with the humans or Homo sapiens sapiens, and then so on and so on, they all mix together like I said in the last video. Please watch that if you don't know what I'm talking about. You'll see here that mainstream are still finding in different locations, this one's Israel, another skull for a different type of Homo sapien that obviously came and went, which would make sense. Another one here that they found, and another one here they call him Dragon Man, found. I think this one's China. But just to prove it, now this is Harvard University's own paper here. So they're saying Homo erectus, but it could have been Neanderthal with the missing link. So that's obviously the Anunnaki. But look, they admit there's inbreeding between different species, and this is exactly what I was just saying in the last video. So I kind of feel like I'm correct. Why are there redheads more in Scotland than most other places? Now that actually makes sense, because in Scotland, we've mentioned already that giants around the world were more redhead than they were any other colour. Now here's a book talking about the folklore of giants in Scotland. And there was actually quite a lot of giants supposedly in Scotland. Now, if you take into account that when the Anunnaki had relationships with the Homo sapiens and they created the Nephilim, not all were Nephilim. Not all of them were absolutely huge. Some of them were, 6-7 foot. And eventually those made their way around the world, which is why we've got different places with different colours. But predominantly a lot of them actually settled into Scotland. Now, if you look at mainstream, they actually also say the same thing. They say that redheads come from the Middle East. And as we know, the Middle East is where the Anunnaki. So how many humans are there if there was inbreeding between Neanderthals and humans and Nephilim and everything else? Right. So we know there's a missing link, and we know why. Now, here it says there's only one species of human. However, I disagree. I think there's about 10 on the planet at this one time. And that 10 includes blacks, whites, Polynesians, Chinese, Indians, etc. So although we're one species, we're diverse species, so I'd say there's 10. And here it says that there was inbreeding between the Neanderthals and the other species that was here at the time, which is what I'm saying. So how many in total are there? Well, the Smithsonian, which we know lie, there's 21 they suggest. So, and that's without finding all the skeletons, etc. So I'm saying there was probably 30 at one point, if not more. I hope you don't believe mainstream media when they tell you how old things are. So that's a pyramid, that's a ziggurat. Ziggurats are way older than pyramids. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years older, yet mainstream say that these were built around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, not too far off of when they were built. But let's have a look on why mainstream's wrong. So here's mainstream talking about the Great Flood, 2,350 years ago. That's the Great Flood, says this website here. Evidence, ABC News says 5,000 years. Smithsonian says 7,500. That's the difference between that one and that one of 5,000 years. So you can clearly see they haven't got a clue. This website is probably more accurate. It says 5,770. They did some good calculations, which is the way I actually did it based on the literature. So don't hate me if you went to university to study history and you've now worked out that it's a complete waste of time. So this is a stepped pyramid called a ziggurat, which is one of the oldest buildings in the world ever. And mainstream kind of dates it to 2100 BC, which means it would have been in the flood. Because the flood was either 2,000 to 7,000 years ago. So let's see what other people say. So Eric von Danahan, who is on the same page as me, he suggests the same thing. He suggests that they were in the flood. But because the normal Giza pyramids, everyone knows that they're older. The ziggurats are well older than the Great Pyramids in Giza. But how come mainstream here saying they weren't flooded? But yet, if the ziggurats were flooded, these would have been flooded. So you see why I'm saying university have taught you, no, these are not spaceships, these are different types of pyramids. Now, ignore the dates here. As I've proven in the last two videos, mainstream haven't got a clue. And if they do have a clue, they're hiding the actual real dates from us. Now, obviously, they hid the real dates from us, which, if you believe my videos and the literature, which was the ancient text that tells us that they built these, the Anunnaki built these when they came here, then these are hundreds of thousands of years old. Now, obviously, if mainstream allowed us to know that, then obviously once we know that these are hundreds of thousands of years old, that then means the Anunnaki were real, and then aliens are real, and it's a whole new world, and God isn't what we all think he is. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at these descriptions and dates when on mainstreams. They are wrong by hundreds of thousands of years. So as we move along with the Anunnaki story to about from 100,000 years ago to about 30,000 years ago, we see that the Neanderthals were wiped out. Now, that could have been because they weren't very smart, or humans or Homo sapiens sapiens could have wiped them out, but most of the hominids around had gone by then, so it's just left the Homo sapiens sapiens. And as I mentioned in a previous video, I think there's about 10 species of Homo sapiens sapiens now scattered around the world, and that would have been around 30,000 years ago. Now, the Anunnaki 30,000 years ago were still having relationships with the Homo sapiens sapiens, creating the Nephilim, or Watchers, whatever you want to call them. Now, that's where the problem started, because so many of these now were giants and were causing problems and eating people, and the king Anu didn't like it. History in the making. You're watching this live here now. This is a skull recently found in a cave in South Africa. Anyone that's watched these videos knows the importance of South Africa and how the Anunnaki created Adam and Eve. Now, this is special because it's from a hominid called Homo naledi, which is yet another species that was around recently found, that was around the time of the Anunnaki. So now we've got at least 4 or 5 species that the Anunnaki could have been manipulating their DNA to create the modern man, Homo sapiens sapien. And what's amazing about this is, as you see here, is there, even this website saying something amazing was going on in this cave 200 to 300,000 years ago. What was that amazing stuff? I'll tell you in the next video. What makes this Homo naledi child skull so important to me is how mainstream are so thick, and I say that with the utmost sincerity. So this skull was found in a cave. It was such a tight spot in this cave in South Africa 300,000 years ago. It was there, and even the cave people had trouble trying to get through. That's why they've called it the Superman Crawl. Now, the why I say mainstream's thick is they're saying, oh, it was probably a death ritual, that this child's skull was in a particular place that you couldn't really get to. And this is 300,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers were around 11 to 12,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers, that was just about working out how to team up and do stuff. So they're saying 300,000 years ago, literally, primates were thinking of death rituals. Come on, join with me and say how thick they are. RH negative blood type. Now we're here to find out where it actually come from. Mainstream do not know. That is actually a fact. If you Google it, they'll come up with theories, but you'll see they're all different and they really don't know when. They can kind of guess that it was tens of thousands of years ago. What is tens of thousands of years ago? Anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 years. Now, you can guess where we're going with this. So let's have a look at who these people are now that has the majority of it. So there's a place called Basque in between France and Spain. Now, they have the most population of people at 35%, I think it is, that has RH negative. So that's important as we continue through these videos to find out who and where it come from, RH negative. Now, this is what the Basque people look like. They're European, and no, this is not him from the BFG giant. However, I might be giving a bit of a clue away here. And keep watching. Giants and RH negative blood type. Hold that thought. Let's go back to the Basque people who live in between France and Spain. What's interesting about them is they actually got their own language. Now, why in the middle of 2 countries would they have their own language? It's quite unique. Now, let's have a look at what the NHS says about rhesus negative. They say it's a disease. Now, a disease means it's a foreign body. It shouldn't be there. So let's see what the Bible says about Now this is a website, I won't even try and pronounce that, called that, and they're saying that the Bible says that RH negatives from angels, and we know angels are Anunnaki, so there we go, fallen angels, as I mentioned many times before, interbreeding with human women, creating the giants known as the Nephilims. So let's have a look now. There's where they would have bred, and that's Mesopotamia. There's a land mass there, quite easily could have got to Spain. Now that means Spain would have had to have possibly some redheads. And it turns out redheads is not uncommon, it's common in many regions. Are you RH negative, rhesus negative blood type? If you are, then you are a descendant of the Anunnaki and humans. So the humans were created by the Anunnaki, which were an alien race, and then the alien race had relationships with the humans that they created, which resulted in the Nephilim. Now we know the Nephilim as giants, but they weren't all giants. Some of them were 5, 6, 7 foot, so it's not inconceivable to imagine that these actual Nephilim carried on living after the flood. So the flood was actually brought on by the will of the gods, which there's ancient texts which we now call the Book of Giants, but there's ancient texts that actually talk about giants, but we converted it into a book. But basically it says, as we all know, the story goes, God was happy, which we know God's the Anunnaki, to allow the flood to happen to get rid of the giants. So that happened. So the Anunnaki allowed the flood, and after the flood, giants still existed, but obviously they'd done a runner. They didn't want to stay around, so they split and they went off to different places, as far away as they could. You know, some went to Scotland, Ireland, others went to hidden caves in Afghanistan and things like that. But the smaller Nephilim blended in with the humans that were around. So the humans were anywhere between 4 and 5.5, possibly 6 if you're lucky, foot tall. So the smaller Nephilim blended in. Now that's interesting, because that then means the those Nephilim had relationships with Nephilim, and Nephilim had relationships with Nephilim, you know, the smaller ones, and there you are if you're rhesus negative. Now the other people that have different blood types are obviously between the humans. So there's one blood type there. Then you've got the humans that had relationships with the Neanderthals. There's a different blood type there, and so on. So hopefully that concludes why we have rhesus negative that shouldn't really be here. It's not a natural blood type. It's classed as a disease. It kills babies. So the only way, the logic behind that would be that it's an alien blood type, and that makes complete sense as to why. So yes, you are a direct descendant of the Anunnaki. However, the humans that are here, the other people that are not, were genetically altered by the Anunnaki to create humans. So technically they're part alien as well, with some of the Anunnaki's DNA, but not sort of proper relationship, but just parts of their DNA. So technically all of us Homo sapiens sapiens are part alien, but please get down and worship the rhesus negative people, because they are more alien than us. I just have to address this person here to end the point that people might say there's no such thing as the Anunnaki. Okay, so these stone tablets, carved in walls, carved on tablets, this is the Sumerian cuneiform, but they talk about the Anunnaki and they talk about what they did. So there's no, you know, if you wanted to fake that, you would need to create a whole new language. Now there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of these tablets, so scattered all over Mesopotamia. So if someone was to fake that, they would have had to have gone round, learnt a new language, dug all these out. This is before the internet. Hope that someone would find them, hope that someone would translate them. Yeah. So that's they're real. Okay, there's no denying that. Now the first language ever was the Sumerian language, this one we're looking at here, and it just suddenly appeared. There was no transition from another language. This is the language that suddenly appeared, and it was a full language. It wasn't broken language, you know, like a bit of drawings, a bit of this, a bit of that. It's a fully complete language, and the only way you can get a fully complete language if whoever wrote that language knew it already. So that means it's probably the Anunnaki from another planet who had their own language and came to Earth. So that makes sense. Now, going to the statues that talk about the Anunnaki, as you can see, there's hundreds of these carvings and statues. Now, if someone wanted to fake these, they would have had to fake them a long time ago, at least 500 years ago, to give us the impression. There's a thing called patina as well, which is obviously dates things as much as they can. I don't know if you know what that means, but basically these are old, very, very old. And if someone was going around to fake all these carvings of these people in giant positions, I know people will say, oh, well, that's just a figure of speech. But then if it's a figure of speech, then why were there giant skeletons found? Why was the Smithsonian hiding them? So you see, there's enough evidence to point to that there was a race that knew a language prior to us, that was here before us, because the writing was actually written before humans were on the planet. It was humans, Homo sapiens were only here 300,000 years ago, thanks to the Anunnaki, which talk about it. They actually, in that text, talk about how they got here and everything, and then it marries up with the architecture and the buildings and everything else that they've done. So how could someone, it would have to take thousands of people to pull off a stunt to make us all believe that someone wrote all this and hoped that we all learned the language and translated it. It's just impossible for this to have been faked. You just don't go through and carve these things if it's fake. So hopefully that clears that up. I need to briefly mention the Archons, and I say briefly because there's not too much to know about them really. Supposedly they're the creators of the physical universe. Now, if they're the creators of the physical universe, that means they are the god, as opposed to the Anunnaki, who were just our gods. Now, the descriptions of these characters, Archons, is that they're actually evil, and they feed off of very negative experiences, and they have also been referred to as the jinn, as demons, or as serpents. So you probably find them in Bill Gates' house right now having a cup of tea with him. The Archons, in my opinion, I just don't think there's enough to go on to say that these created the physical universe. The writings obviously came after the Anunnaki were here, so is it possible that just some of them were Anunnakis? I don't know. If Homo sapiens eventually killed off Neanderthals and the other hominids, I thought we'd just have a quick look at what animals were around at the time that the Anunnaki and the humans were now around Europe. So here's a website here. I know it's Wikipedia, but it gives a list of the creatures and when they died. Now, when you see 3000 BC, please remember that that's before Christ. So Christ was 2,000 years from where we are now. So that makes it 5,000 years ago, or 3000 BC. So I'm just pointing that out. So there's a long list here of animals that would have been food over the thousands of years ago when the Anunnaki and humans were here. So it would have made sense that we were probably killing off at that point in vast droves all different types of creatures that unfortunately met humans. So it's an interesting thing. It's not just that, it's fish. This is a stone structure, a round stone structure in Israel. I won't try and pronounce it. And basically mainstream found some pottery, so they think that they can date it but different dates. So basically they haven't got a clue really, because just because there was a bit of pottery there, it doesn't mean, I mean, I could go to Stonehenge and drop a cup, it doesn't mean it was built yesterday. So let's just have a look at this stone, and that's because the Anunnaki were using these for their power sources. So and it comes from the ley lines under the ground. So look at that, obviously it's worn down terribly, but this is just someone doing an experiment with sound, which would be the frequency that the Earth would be using. Now, different frequencies produce different patterns. As you can see here, when the device is turned on, it creates a different pattern each time at a different frequency. And that's exactly what the ley lines do to help create the power. So to keep the Anunnaki powered up, they created these stone circles. Now it's possible that actually they got little humans to move the stones around, these tiny stones. But look at this. This was the one in Israel. Look at that. Just study that for a second. And now here's one in South Africa. You see, you see the similarity there. So if you watch my last video, you'll see the significance of these stone circles. Now, Michael Tellinger has suggested that all ancient, or a lot of the ancient stone structures are actually designed in such a way that it creates a circuit board, and then it can feed power off of a sort of a grid. So in other words, the energy coming up from the earth creates a power conduit grid that they could then channel the energy off using actually rows of stones. This is a representation of a skull that was found in Greece. Scientists and universities said it was Neanderthal around 300,000 years ago-ish, but then they realised it's not actually a Neanderthal. Now it's a Homo sapiens sapien, so now they've changed their dates as well. But what's interesting is where they thought it was, they're now saying that it's a different species to us, even though it's a Homo sapiens sapien. Now that means that everything that I've been saying in the other videos about how the different species of Homo sapiens sapiens interbred with each other and hominids would create different species, which is what we've got on the planet today. So that all makes sense, and of course mainstream does agree that 300,000 years ago, which is when the Anunnaki created the first humans in Africa, yes, everything seems to be matching up on my videos. Feel free to click that like button if you think I'm right. Is there any proof that the Anunnaki physically created the Homo sapiens sapiens? Well, this is a carving, ancient carving, and people say that this thing in the middle is the tree of life. Here's another example from a different carving, again showing some sort of tree that they're dealing with. This is what it actually looks like if you look carefully at it. Now, scientists and scholars possibly believe that it's a DNA strand. I'm not an expert on DNA, but that's what they're saying that it is, and therefore that's them showing that they did create the modern man. Other references to DNA, the other people, these ain't me, suggesting here is this object that they're holding, and they're saying that it's possibly that. But looking at Rome, where they had tridents and things like that, I think this is more of an electrical device for maybe a weapon of some sort. People that read the Bible have said, no, I'm wrong with the two lots of Adam and Eves. The first one's in Abzu, South Africa, 300,000 years ago, and then the other Adam and Eve, which was the Adam and Eve that we know that had Cain, Abel, Seth, that were in Mesopotamia, and they were the offspring of the Anunnaki and the ones that they'd created 300,000 years ago. So now let's just see what the Bible says, because people saying I'm wrong. But if you look at Genesis 6, and it came to pass that when men, that's the first lot of men in South Africa 300,000 years ago, began to multiply on the face of the earth, and they had daughters were born unto them. Then the sons of the gods, or God, but the sons of gods it should have been, then that's the second lot, and they then had relationships with the daughters of men, which were the first lot. So you can see I'm absolutely right, and the Bible actually agrees with me as well. Thank you. So Noah was obviously very important in our history, and he was the descendant of Adam and Eve. So basically he was a hybrid, just like Adam and Eve was, not a true Anunnaki. However, there seems to be some discrepancy compared to the lineage of Adam and Eve going down to Noah. And it does come across that Noah, just like Jesus, was a hybrid again. In other words, the wife of Lamech, who had Noah, was probably impregnated in some way, whether it's old-fashioned way or whether it was gene manipulation, to produce Noah. Now I'm just going to press play on a bit of audio.
And after some days, my son Methuselah took a wife for his son Lamech, and she became pregnant by him and bore a son. And his body was white as snow, and red as the blooming of a rose, and the hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes beautiful. And when he opened his eyes, he lighted up the whole house like the sun, and the whole house was very bright. And thereupon he arose in the hands of the midwife, opened his mouth, and conversed with the Lord of Righteousness. And his father Lamech was afraid of him, and fled, and came to his father Methuselah. And he said unto him, I have begotten a strange son, diverse from and unlike man, and resembling the sons of the God of heaven. And his name...
Okay, so the God of heaven, obviously space. So what we've got there is possibly a hybrid from the Anunnaki that created Noah to deliberately carry on the lineage, knowing that after 600 years, I don't know whether they knew this 600 years before, but after 600 years of Noah living, the flood came, and then he survived 300 odd years after the flood. So Noah, very important, but I don't think he was a true descendant of Adam and Eve. Okay, go with me here on this one. So I think Noah from the Noah and Ark story wasn't actually who we think he is. So here's the lineage here. You've got Cain, Abel, Seth, etc. And then coming down, the women were the ones in pink, and the blue here were the men. And Lamech was the man that had relationships with another of their type, which is obviously an offspring off of Cain, Abel, Seth, which were all humans. But Noah looked totally different. So I think that instead of Lamech, I think an Anunnaki god or an Anunnaki had relationships with this woman and produced Noah. And the reason why I say that is because, as you see here, that's what Noah was supposedly looked like. Now, who else would have had bright white hair? God. Which gods? Yeah, all the gods, all the Anunnaki. So it could have been an Anunnaki there instead of Lamech. That around 38,000 BC, or about 40,000 years ago, Enlil, the god, the main god on Earth, was getting really annoyed that these little humans, look at the size of these pesky little humans, were actually eating them out house and home, so to speak, because there were so many of these little humans now compared to the amount of Anunnaki there were. And Enlil was getting really frustrated, and the weather was changing then as well. It was starting to the climate was totally changing, and the seasons started to dry up, so the food was becoming really scarce. So Enlil thought, right, I know what, if all the Anunnaki go back to their home planet and leave these humans to basically destroy themselves, eat them themselves out of food. But there was another reason why Enlil actually wanted to go back to Nibiru, is because apparently they were aging a lot faster here on Earth than they were on their own planet. Okay, listen up, this is getting serious now for the Anunnaki. Their lifespans was getting a lot shorter because of the rotation of Earth around the sun compared to their planet. Now, they did have this thing called elixir, which would help them with longevity of life, but it wasn't grown on Earth. It wasn't a substance on Earth. So they had to keep bringing it from their own planet. And even though it did preserve life, it wasn't doing it 100%, so they were still aging a lot quicker. Now, the king of Nibiru, Anu, sent a message back to Enlil and said, no, you can't come back to Nibiru because you will pretty much die there and then because of your it will catch up with you. So you and all the other Anunnaki are now got to stay on Earth, which is very sad. All take a moment, please. I mentioned in the last video about elixir, which is a substance that can be drank and you end up with eternal life, but it's not eternal, it's very long life. Now, this substance comes from the planet Nibiru. We don't actually have it here on Earth, and it was brought to Earth to help the Anunnaki with their aging problems. Now, Indiana Jones, as you know, mentioned it based on biblical events, which obviously then proves that someone was talking about it back then. Now, this potion could have also been poured into a fountain, because there's the story of Fountain of Youth, which I think is actually going to be about the new Indiana Jones movie, and I think they're going to actually have Indiana drink from the Fountain of Youth and then go back to being younger using deep fake technology, so we're going to see a young Indiana Jones and an older Indiana Jones in the same movie, which sounds pretty cool. You would have to wonder why we had skulls Anunnaki skulls, alien skulls, on Earth, buried. Why didn't they take them back, or why didn't they leave before they died? Well, if you watch the last couple of videos, you'll see that they actually had issues going back to their home planet. So basically they ended up dying here on Earth, and thus the reason why they were buried. And of course, over time we found these skulls and we've realized now who they belong to. Because the Anunnaki seemed to be stuck here, they started to domesticate animals such as, and this was around 17,000 BC to 9,500 BC, give or take. So they domesticated dogs, sheep, goats, pigs, cattle with horns, as you can see there, and obviously hornless cattle as well. So they made their bed and they had to lie in it, so to speak. Here's a NASA guy trying to explain why there is no Nibiru.
If this object had come through the solar system in the past, and you remember the idea is it's on an orbit of 3,600 years. If it had come through in the past, its gravity would have messed up the orbits of the inner planets. The Earth, Venus, Mars, probably would have stripped the moon away completely.
Okay, so that's him, and this is me now saying there's a planet out there called Fomalhaut B, and it goes around its star every 2,000 years, and it doesn't push the planets out. We've been watching it, and it doesn't. The planets ain't flying off or anything. And who's to say that Nibiru didn't already push us off our orbits, etc.? Who's to say we're now not in an orbit that we was in before? Now you got to remember there was the planet supposedly spins on its axis. Who's to say it wasn't Nibiru that caused that? You see, this is why I hate these people from NASA that try and debunk things when they're... So around 13,000 BC, King Anu, who now was back on Nibiru, was advised by his scientists that next time their planet comes round to Earth, it will be a lot closer and will cause floodings, etc. So he sent a messenger off to Enlil and Enki and told them that next time the planet comes round, which was in probably about 3,000 years, it's going to... and that's 3,000 years from then, not what I'm talking now. It will flood, and their best bet is to actually get in their ships and leave orbit or stay in orbit and wait for the flood to subside and wait for their planet to pass and carry on. And this brings us up to the Great Deluge that's written in the Bibles, and I do actually believe it was real. It's not just the Bible that's wrote about it. Other texts around the world talked about this great flood. Enlil persuaded the rest of the Anunnaki not to tell the humans about this impending flood, and Enki was actually against that, and he denounced them and didn't want anything to do with it. But eventually he had to swear on it and said he wouldn't tell the humans. However, Enki went away and accidentally told a wall apparently, and someone was listening, a human was listening, and so then so that's his way of getting out of explaining it directly to a human. So he didn't lie, he just was telling it to a wall. But anyway, this human then found out, and of course the story goes that Noah was informed of what was coming, and Enki suggested to him that he needs to create some sort of device or raft or ark that would cover him hermetically so it wouldn't leak. This is the Noah's Ark, or copy of it, supposedly, and it was round, which goes against what we normally imagine it to be. But that's actually written in a tablet by the Babylonians. Now, it could have been actually Enki writing this, because over the years, as we know, the languages have changed. And it does actually talk about a round boat, etc. Now, this guy here... works for the British Museum, Ivan Finkel, and he says no such thing. This is all fake. Ignore that. Nothing to see here. But those of you that know me, he works. Let's have a look where he works. Ivan Finkel. He works for the British Museum, and he's interested in. Well, he's the main person, one of the main people from Mesopotamian scripts and languages. So whatever he says goes. Yes, British Museum. Actually is called the Rockefeller Museum, also known as. So anyone that knows me knows Rockefeller. So my last video was explaining how this person here is in charge of the Mesopotamian artifacts for linguistics and scripts, etc., etc. So as I mentioned before, if he says it's fake, this tablet that he's holding here, then yeah. But as I mentioned in the last video, actually the British Museum is also known as the Rockefeller Museum. So in the Rockefellers, if you don't already know, they debunk everything to do with anything that's real. So as long as it's debunked by someone from Rockefellers, you can pretty much say it's pretty much real as opposed to being debunked. So going back to the Ark, now Enki asked Noah to put animals in there, the domesticated animals. He also said, can he look after the DNA of the animals that they've already got? So him, Enki and his sister had collected DNA. So the idea was that after the flood they would grab the DNA back off of Noah, so that at least the species will be able to continue. Another almost exclusive for you guys, Antarctica did actually have this kind of lush environment, and so this is I get these information sent to me because I'm interested in this. Antarctica's breakthrough, saying that they've now found evidence that it was actually an ancient forest. Now if you go along with Admiral Byrd's suggestion that he actually saw green vegetation there, and we go along with the fact that the military are there, and supposedly there's an ancient alien spacecraft that was there that was probably dated back to when there was no ice in Antarctica. So this all now starts to make sense, that really there was land there, and that's possibly why there's also pyramids supposedly under ice. So if you start adding all of this together, everything that my videos are saying actually sounds kind of true. You're probably wondering where the name Anunnaki come from. We didn't give it to them. It was actually given to them by King Anu. So at the time, this was way before humans were even invented. This is literally just as they was about to start mining for gold in South Africa. So there was 600 people in South Africa, or 600 Anunnaki, South Africa, 300 in Mesopotamia, and there was another 300, I believe, in on Mars. And King Anu did a simultaneous broadcast to all of these Anunnaki and said to them, look, you guys are heroes. We are now going to call you Anunnaki, those who heaven, or those from space came to Earth. So that's not the only time they've changed names. In fact, Enki wasn't actually called Enki. Enki was originally called Enwa, I think it was. So they like to change their names, but that's where the Anunnaki's name come from. I get asked a lot, how can I know what the Anunnaki was saying? How can I know what they thought? Well, a lot of it comes from the ancient texts, obviously. Well, pretty much all of it comes from the ancient text. And the Lost Book of Enki is a prime example. So this one's translated by Zachariah Sitchin. And here I'm just going to play some audio for you of Alalula. You wonder where that comes from. Alalula is talking to King Anu on Nibiru, but Alalula is on Earth, and he's left Nibiru because he was banished. Even though he was a king, he was banished, long story, and he went to Earth and he found gold there, which is exactly what the Anunnaki needed. So while on Earth, he then radios back to Anu and says, I found gold, I'm now your savior. And have a listen to the actual discussion.
Was he not on the Nibiru hiding in the chariot to a place of concealment gone? The commanders of chariots were summoned, savants the beamed words considered. The words from Nibiru did not come, from beyond the hammered bracelet were they spoken. This was their finding, this to Anu the king they reported. Stunned was Anu, the happening he pondered. Let words of acknowledgement to Alelu be sent, to the assembled he was saying. At the place of the celestial chariots the command was given, to Alelu words were spoken. Anu, the king, to you his greetings sends, of your well-being to learn he is pleased. For your departing from Nibiru there was no reason. Enmity is not in Anu's heart. If gold for salvation you have indeed discovered, let Nibiru be saved. The words of Anu Alelu's chariot did reach. Alelu then quickly answered, if your savior I am to be, your lives to save, convene the princes to assembly, my ancestry declare supreme. Let the commanders make me their leader, bow to my command. Let the council pronounce me king on the throne Anu to replace. When the words of Alelu on the Nibiru were heard, great was the consternation. How could Anu be deposed? The counselors asked each other. What if Alelu mischief, not truth, is telling? Where is his asylum?
Sorry about that, the phone's ringing in the background, but you see the point there. So basically what happens is we get so much information from the ancient texts. Now, just to give you a little bit of a spoiler, they did allow Alalula to have kingship after finding the gold. Unfortunately, Anu kind of lied, and yeah, he didn't give him the kingship after all, but we'll get to that later on. Okay, this is absolutely serious. The Lost Book of Enki, transcribed by Zachariah Sitchin from ancient texts, says that Enlil actually did something with a young person and got them pregnant. That's absolutely a no-no, and he was banished for that to a remote island on Earth. But the problem is you've got a god doing stupid things. Now that worries me, because obviously that's a no-no. Let me show you what was on the island. Oh, no, sorry. Okay, so you got missiles that were on the island because the commander that flew Enlil to the island had stashed Alalulu's rockets from his ship there and hid them. Anyway, as luck would have it for Enlil, he was a friend of the commander that flew him there, and so Enlil now had these missiles and used them as blackmail to become king again, or god, on Earth. I've got an absolute treat for you guys, and I think probably between us, we're the only people that's worked this out, so bear with me. So Nibiru, the spaceships use water as a propellant. We know this because the Lost Book of Enki literally talks about sucking up water to use on their rocks inside their spaceship to propel them. And they also use the water to make a path through the Hammer Bracelet, which is the asteroid belt. But I've been struggling for the longest time thinking, how the hell can they have water that can propel them? You know, steam is fine, but you can only go so much. But recently, very recently, in the last few days, this has come out, and it's basically saying new type of water ice hotter than the sun's surface. So you're thinking, wow, you know, they could use that, but is it on their planet? And then it says here, planetary scientists believe similar conditions in pressure, blah, 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 on other planets. You guys are smart and logical. You'll work this out as I go along. So this is a stone, massive ancient stone in Baalbek, Lebanon. And I say it was the Anunnaki that was taking it and using it as a part of a landing pad for their craft. But it was unfinished. In other words, they didn't take it out. Now, have a look at that. Yep. Mainstream say that, you know, primitive man was doing this. Okay, so here's another one in a different location, another huge stone. Now that little gap there is the width of a person's shoulders. So how do they cut underneath this? Primitive man, how do they cut underneath to take the whole stone up? Now have a look, there's a description here of showing how they do it. But look at the gap, the distance they would need to be able to, they would need equal distance from there to there to be able to push something underneath to cut it. Do you see what I'm saying? Unless it was some sort of laser beam type device. You get what I'm... What if the Anunnaki never created Homo sapiens sapien, humans? Well, there's a great piece about that on a website called livescience.com/what if humans never existed on Earth. And basically it talks about what would happen if humans didn't live on Earth. Now, it's saying that there would still be missing animals because of ice age, temperatures, etc. But it does go on to say that the landscape would end up looking pretty much like this. And now, if that's the case, then humans are quite bad because we've literally killed the planet. But it does talk about Neanderthals carrying on our habit of killing things, and then it sort of says that Neanderthals would be like a tribe now. They would be, you know, like the tribes in Africa, so they wouldn't be technologically advanced, but they would be able to communicate and live on the... Whether or not you believe there's a rover on Mars, or whether it's actually on Earth on a tiny little island that NASA uses as a facsimile, NASA has now admitted that there is organic life. So we are not the only planet out there with life. So that ends that. So we're not alone. Now, when the Anunnaki went there, they set up bases as an away station. And supposedly, according to the Lost Book of Enki, there was atmosphere, but it was not great atmosphere. It was very thin, which actually coincides with what I've heard from whistleblowers. And then the Anunnaki wrote down that there was water on the planet. So if there's water, there's a good chance there was plant life somewhere local to that. So that makes sense, but it means who blew up Mars, who set the nukes off if it wasn't the Anunnaki? And I'll cover that. I know I said before I was unsure on the face of Mars, but going back rereading the Lost Book of Enki, as I am, literally it does say the face on Mars, so I'd read that a long time ago. So basically, Alalula, who was on Earth, who had a wrestling match again with King Anu, lost, bit the private parts and swallowed them of King Anu. That his punishment was to be sent to Mars on his own, because no one else at that point was on Mars, and he was to die on Mars because of the poison that was inside him after swallowing the private parts. So apparently there's some sort of issue swallowing the private parts of an Anunnaki, by the sounds of it. Now his grandson Anzu went with him and was a hero for going with him and staying on this planet Mars all alone. There was some atmosphere, and apparently there's some water there, so it wasn't great atmosphere, and it was just barely breathable. But basically what happened was Alalula did die, and the Anunnaki did say that next time their planet come round, they would pick him back up again, and that's called one Shah. So that instead of a year, the Anunnaki call it a Shah. So they did actually come back round the next Shah, and they found Anzu, because his helmet had a beacon on it, apparently, and they asked him where Alalula was, and they said he said he was buried in a massive rock. So they looked at the bones, they pulled out the stones where Anzu had, covered up the entrance. They looked at the body, and then they covered it back up as respect, because he was technically the first king on another planet to die other than Nibiru. So they went up in their spaceships. They took Anzu back up with them, so he's not alone on the planet, although he almost died on the planet. They literally had to give him 60 something or other. The translation's not right, but maybe like a refibrillator or whatever it's called. Anyway, so they went up in their spaceships, and as a sign of respect, they used their laser beams to cut a face into the rock where Alalula was buried underneath, or inside in the cave part, and they shaped the face to remind. Now the idea was that it was always looking back up at Nibiru, because he technically should have been a king of Nibiru at one point, and was. So that's a pretty sad story, because Alalula was tricked and lied to by King Anu, and so unfortunately his demise was quite sad. All take a moment to pray for him. So let's have a look what they say about it. So it says here, DNA not only shows that she was human, but she belonged to the local population. So human DNA. Now, a banana has human DNA. A fruit fly has human DNA. Basically, everything has human DNA. In fact, it's not human DNA. It's just us being big-headed. It's a generic DNA. Anyway, but let's go along. And she belonged to the local population of Chile. So that means chances are she's not going to cross the ocean to go somewhere else, is she? Tiny little thing like that, bless. Well, actually, in Egypt, they found two mummified versions of the same skeleton. Both again female, and they have come up with this concocted story that they believe it was Tutankhamun, who was a kid himself, that they're his children, and they were fetuses, and even though they don't look like anything like a human, etc., etc., and that's why they were mummified. So that you can see mainstream here clutching at straws. But let's have a look at why the original. So now these have got to be fake as well if they're not. If people think they're fake. But let's have a look at who actually debunked it. So this was a guy called Gary Nolan, and he worked for the Stanford University in California. Let's have a look at Gary. There he is. He's an upstanding fellow, so I'm sure he wouldn't. He would tell us the truth, wouldn't he? Because well, who's funding the place that he worked at? Let's have a look. So Stanford University. Oh, got some funding. Wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. From what's that at the top? Rockefeller Foundation. Weren't they the ones that pay for money for the Cairo Museum, the Smithsonian, other institutions? And they basically, it appears when you look deep into it, they don't want us to know our true history. Because you'll find out that the Smithsonian actually destroyed giant skeletons, and that's why people say, oh, there's no such thing as giant skeletons. They actually destroyed them and had a court case over it. So when you put all of this together, it is not debunked, because clearly they're actually saying that it was a real skeleton just because it's got DNA in it that matches fruit flies. Ignore the word human there. So what do you think? You think, once again, OurTrueHistory.co.uk has boom dropped the mic? Thank you.